The envelope sat on my kitchen table like a silent witness, white, crisp, official, a tiny coffin for the life I thought I had. 5 years of marriage reduced to signatures and legal closure. My fingers hovered above it for a long time, trembling slightly as the late afternoon light caught the gold band still circling my left hand. The metal glimmered once before dulling, as if it too understood that this was its last day of belonging. "Just sign it, Ava," I whispered to myself, my voice echoing in the empty apartment. The words hung in the still air, heavy and final. The pen felt heavier than it should have, a strange weight that made my hands shake as I scrawled my name across the dotted line. The ink bled slightly at the edges, the black spreading outward as if reluctant to obey. Ava Collins, the last act of a marriage that had begun with champagne toasts and ended in silence. Ryan's name stared up at me from the page, his neat signature mocking me. The man who had promised forever, who had sworn that I was his only truth, had been sleeping with someone else for months. Maybe longer. I had found the receipts, the texts, the perfume that wasn't mine. It was a cliche so old it almost felt insulting. The husband with a younger woman. The wife too tired, too sad, too consumed by infertility to notice the distance until it became a canyon. The irony wasn't lost on me. That morning's test, the one I had taken more out of habit than hope, had been positive. 2 faint pink lines. I had torn the stick in half and thrown it into the trash before the tears came. The universe had always had a cruel sense of humor when it came to me. I wasn't going to trap a man with a baby he no longer wanted. I couldn't. I wouldn't. I'd rather raise the child alone than be a burden someone resented. The apartment was too quiet. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, the kind that filled silence rather than broke it. I looked around at the space I had once loved, now stripped of warmth. The photos were gone. The couch where we had fallen asleep watching movies had indentations that no longer aligned with our bodies. Everything here felt borrowed, temporary, like a set waiting for its final scene. My phone buzzed. I jumped. The screen lit up with my sister's name. "Did you do it?" "Me." "Just did." "Good. Get dressed. I'm taking you out tonight. No arguments." I almost smiled. That was Tessa in a single text command first, explanation later. I typed a reply but deleted it before sending. She wouldn't take no for an answer anyway. I stared at the divorce papers one last time, the ink barely dry, before sliding them into the envelope. It felt like sealing away a version of myself I would never meet again. When Tessa said she was taking me out, I had imagined something small. Dinner maybe, a bar. But she had other plans. "Wear the black dress I bought you for Christmas," she said when she arrived, breezing into my apartment like a gust of expensive perfume and purpose. "I am not in the mood to dress up. You will be once you see where we're going." Her grin was too bright, her energy too manic. She was trying too hard, and I was too tired to fight it. That was always our dynamic. She pushed, I yielded. I showered and put on the dress. It clung more than I remembered. The slit higher than I was comfortable with, but when I caught my reflection in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. My hair fell in soft waves over my shoulders. My makeup was careful, practiced. The red lipstick felt like armor. For the first time in months, I looked alive, even if I didn't feel it. "You look gorgeous," Tessa said when I stepped into the living room. "He was an idiot to let you go." "Okay. Don't start," I warned, grabbing my purse. "Where are we going?" Her eyes sparkled with mischief. "Somewhere special. It's called the Mirage." My stomach dropped. I had heard of the Mirage. Everyone had. The kind of place that didn't just open its doors to anyone. You needed connections, money, or magic. "There's no way we're getting in." Tessa dangled a small black card between her fingers, the gold lettering catching the light. "Not with this, we aren't." "I won't." "How did you get that?" I asked. She smiled, a secret smile. "I know people who know people." Those words should have alarmed me. They didn't. Not enough anyway. The city was alive that night. We drove past glass towers that shimmered with neon and rain, past people spilling out of bars, laughing too loud, loving too briefly. When we arrived, the mirage loomed like something out of a dream, dark glass, gold light, and velvet shadows. Two men in suits guarded the entrance, their expressions unreadable. Tessa handed one of them the black card. He glanced at it, then at us, and stepped aside. Just like that. The rope lifted. The world shifted. Inside, the music wasn't loud so much as physical. It pulsed through my chest, synced with my heartbeat. The air smelled of champagne and secrets, the kind of place where time could disappear. Relax, Tessa said, her finger squeezing mine as we were escorted upstairs. Tonight is about new beginnings. The VIP section overlooked the main floor. From there, the crowd below looked like an ocean of movement and color. I sat at the table Tessa had led us to, the champagne already waiting, poured before I could protest. I lifted my glass out of reflex. To freedom, she said, raising hers. To freedom, I echoed, though the word tasted bitter. I tried to let the alcohol do its work, to soften the edges of my thoughts. I was on my second glass when it happened. A change in the air, subtle but undeniable. The kind of shift that comes when someone powerful enters the room. The crowd parted, bodies moving aside instinctively as three men walked in. The one in the center drew every gaze. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair cropped close to his head. His suit looked like it had been tailored by someone who understood power as an art form. Even from a distance, there was something magnetic about him, the kind of energy that didn't ask for attention but commanded it. Who is that? I asked. Tessa followed my gaze. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. That's Ethan Blake. The name meant nothing to me, but the reverence in her tone told me it should. He owns this place, she said softly. Among other things. I frowned. Why do I feel like you're not telling me something? She looked away, her hand tightening on her glass. Just trust me, Ava. I promised I'd take care of you. Before I could press further, a shadow fell across our table. A scent reached me, first cedarwood, and something darker, sharper. Then a voice. Low, smooth, controlled. Miss Collins, he said. My name in his mouth sounded like both a question and a claim. I turned, and there he was. Ethan Blake. Up close, he was even more impossible to look away from. His eyes were dark and unreadable, his presence heavy but not cruel. Your sister said you'd be joining us tonight. Us. The word made my stomach twist. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I began, rising to my feet, but the room tilted slightly. The colors around me bled together. My limbs felt heavy, disconnected. Ethan's hand shot out, steadying me with a grip that was firm but careful. Are you all right? He asked. I just need some air, I managed, but the words felt distant, like they were coming from someone else. His eyes flicked to my half-empty glass, then to Tessa. Something silent passed between them. His jaw tightened. Nick, he said sharply, and one of the men behind him stepped forward. Take Miss Collins to my office. She needs to rest. No, I tried to protest, but my tongue felt slow, my vision blurring. Tessa, what's happening? My sister's face swam before me, guilt warring with resolve. It's for your own good, Ava. You'll understand. I knows. Ethan's arm slipped under mine, his voice low near my ear. I've been waiting a long time to meet you. Darkness folded over me like velvet. The last thing I remembered was the scent of cedar and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my cheek as the world faded away. The world returned in fragments, as if my mind were sifting through a drawer of broken glass and choosing which light to let in. There was the cool press of leather beneath my cheek, the distant throb of bass swallowed by a heavy door, the faint click of heels on marble, the low current of voices that did not belong to any face I could place. Cedar and something darker threaded through the air, anchoring me to a center I could not see. When I tried to move, my body reminded me that it had opinions. My limbs felt wrapped in wool, my tongue heavy as if it had been persuaded to sleep while the rest of me tried to wake. Easy. The voice came from close by, warmer now, stripped of the polished distance I had heard moments earlier on the balcony above the dancing crowd. Breathe, that is all. I opened my eyes to a room that did not belong to the club's public fantasy. It was quieter, the music reduced to a heartbeat. Outside these walls, black wood and iron, a sweep of city lights through floor-to-ceiling glass, a single piece of art in deep red that looked like a door set on fire. Books lined one wall with the reverence of a private chapel. A heavy desk anchored the space, immaculate and impersonal, as if it were not a workstation, but a stage where decisions were performed rather than made. Ethan Blake sat across from me, not behind the desk but on a low table edge. The distance between us measured exactly, as if he had done this mathematics before. Nick Torres stood to my right, near a panel that might have been a door or a mirror when the room wished to remain unreadable. Both men looked composed in a way that made me acutely aware of my own disarray. The hem of my dress had crept higher along my thigh. I tugged it down, cheeks heating with a shame I could not justify, and refused to explain. "What did you do to me?" My voice sounded hoarse, as if it belonged to a stranger who smoked and confessed things to bartenders. Ethan's expression did not shift. "You were unsteady. I asked my staff to bring you here so you could sit. No one touched you beyond that." His gaze flicked to the untouched glass of water on the small side table beside me. "Drink, slowly." I reached for it, the cool weight of the tumbler a small mercy against my palm. The first swallow tasted like metal and clarity. I took another. The fog lifted by degrees, enough for anger to push through it like a blade. "Tessa." Her name came out as a wound. "Where is my sister?" Nick moved for the first time, speaking in a tone that was meant to be invisible. "She is safe, Miss Collins." Safe. The word did not comfort. It sounded like a verdict that someone else had signed. I turned back to Ethan. He watched me with a patience that felt less like kindness and more like a test he already knew I would take. Up close, he was not beautiful so much as inevitable. There was a stillness in him that suggested other men wasted their movements, and he did not. Power sat on him like a well-tailored suit, not a costume, but a second skin. "You called me Miss Collins out there," I said. "Do you call all your guests by their last names, or only the ones who faint in your club?" "I call people what they prefer to be called," he said, "and I wait for them to tell me who they are." The words were so simple that I almost missed the way they reached beyond this room. I set the water down with too much care, as if gentleness could disguise the tremor in my hand. "I did not faint," I said. Something was in my drink. Silence, brief and bright, as a struck match. Ethan glanced at Nick. It was a glance that contained an instruction, a question, and the name of a man who would soon hate his own reflection. "The service captain for your section has been removed," Nick said. "I will handle it." Handle. Another careful word. They were men who could turn verbs into doors, and I did not know what lay behind this one. I looked at Ethan again. "You are responsible for what happens here." "Yes," he said, and there was no ceremony in it, "which is why you are here instead of on the stairs, and why the person responsible will no longer have a life that intersects with mine." A shiver moved over my skin that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Outside the glass, the city kept shining, oblivious to the ways men like this edited it. "Why am I here?" I asked. And I was not asking about the sofa or the office or the water. "Why did my sister bring me to your club? Why did you say you had been waiting to meet me?" He did not answer immediately. His attention shifted to my left hand, where the ring had left a pale circle like an old sun around an empty finger. He did not look for long. If he was cataloging me, he did it with the restraint of a man who could memorize a room in one breath and forget nothing that mattered. "Because the people you trusted failed you," he said finally. "And sometimes the shortest route to safety is through a door you do not like." "I do not want your door," I said, the anger finally finding its shape. "I do not want your club, your office, your water, your way of looking at me like you already know where I will stand when you move the next piece." Ethan held my gaze. "You will stand where you decide to stand, but you should make that decision awake." The room steadied around me. The buzzing edge of the night dulled into something almost manageable. I tried to remember the last hour with the careful precision of someone checking for missing steps on a staircase. The champagne, Tessa's glittering insistence, the ripple through the crowd when he entered, the cedar and the weight of his hand when the floor tilted. A voice near my ear that did not sound like a threat so much as a truth I had not agreed to hear. "Where is she?" I asked again. Softer this time, not because I trusted him, but because I trusted the way my chest hurt when I said my sister's name. "I want to see her." "You will," he said. "She is in a private lounge adjacent to this floor. She is not alone. She is not in danger." "How convenient for you," I said, the bitterness finally surfacing. "A private lounge where people can be kept safe. Or quiet." Nick did not move, but the air around him altered by a degree that only men like him and men like Ethan notice. Ethan did not look away from me. "I do not keep women quiet," he said. "I remove men who try." It should have sounded like a line. It did not. It landed with the weight of someone's history, though I did not know whose. I stood. The room hesitated and then allowed it. My legs complained but obeyed. The slit of the dress whispered against my thigh as I shifted my weight. I placed my palm on the back of the sofa for one steadying breath and then took it away. Ethan rose at the same time without the courtesy of pretending he needed to. "I am taking you to her," he said. "Nick will walk ahead. I will walk behind. No one will touch you. If you wish to leave this building after you have seen her, you will do so. But you will do it without the person who put something in your glass still working here, and without the man who told him to do it still breathing easily." I should have flinched. I did not. The words did not sound like a threat parceled out to impress me. They sounded like a weather report delivered by someone who controlled the sky over this block. We moved through a short corridor where the music pressed thinner, then into a hallway where soft light fell along framed photographs that were not of famous people, but of hands lit by stage lamps, of an empty dance floor before the night begins, of the way champagne looks when it is poured from too high and catches the light like silk. Whoever had chosen them understood that glamour is not a person, but a texture. At the end of the hall, Nick opened a door and stepped aside. The private lounge was all velvet angles and shadowed corners, designed for secrets that wanted to be seen. Tessa stood near the curved banquet with her arms folded tight across her body. Her lipstick was perfect. Her eyes were not. They were too bright, as if she had been blinking tears back and had decided to defy them by not moving at all. "Ava," she said, and the name broke me more efficiently than any drug. "What did you do?" I asked. No preface, no soft landing. The words were a bridge I set on fire as I walked across it. Tessa's chin lifted the way it always did when she was about to jump and ask permission later. "I kept you alive. That is what I did. You brought me here. You handed me a drink. You watched me fall. I brought you to the only place where the men who have been watching you would not dare take you," she said. "I handed you a drink that I did not know had been touched. I watched you fall because I could not carry you alone. It is a common the MB." Her voice shook on the last word, as if the problem were not the physics, but the love. Ethan remained by the door, a dark notation at the edge of the page. He had the grace not to interrupt, and the arrogance to stay anyway. This was his room. This was his floor. This was his night in a city that pretended to belong to everyone. "What men?" I asked. "What watching?" Tessa looked at Ethan for a long moment and then back at me. "You will not believe it from me," she said. "You never believed those parts from me. But you might listen when someone with cameras and guards and a floor full of men who answer to him says it." Ethan did not look pleased to be used as a piece in our old argument. He did not look displeased either. He crossed the room until he was close enough that I could feel the temper of his attention without having to look up to meet it. "Your ex-husband owes money to people who do not forgive debt," he said. "He also owes them an embarrassment. Embarrassment is more expensive. They have been taking payments in small humiliations for months. Tonight they foreclosed." The room tilted again, but this time it was my life and not the floor. "You do not know him," I said. I know his numbers, Ethan said. Numbers are a man in a language that does not lie. Tessa moved closer, the scent of her perfume, a childhood memory misfiled in the present. I found out 2 months ago, she said. I tried to tell you in a way that would not break you. There is no way. So I made a plan that would make it impossible for them to touch you. I brought you here because he would not try to take you from Ethan Blake. A sound escaped me that was not a word. It was a hinge that had not been oiled. Ethan's gaze flicked to my empty hands, as if confirming that I had not brought a weapon to a war I had not chosen. You will not owe me for protecting you from someone else's debt, he said. That ledger is not the one I keep. What ledger do you keep? I asked, because the only way to survive a night like this is to insist on definitions. The one where people who come to me are safer when they leave than when they arrived, he said. The one where I do not allow poison in my glasses. The one where I decide who is allowed to be within 3 feet of the women at my tables. The words should have sounded paternal or proprietary. They did not. They sounded like a system that ran on rules rather than favors, and I did not know whether to be grateful or terrified that he considered me inside it. I looked at Tessa again. Her eyes were begging for something I was not ready to give. Forgiveness is a door that opens from both sides, and mine had been bolted for so long that I had forgotten where I kept the key. I am leaving, I said, because action is a language the body understands when the heart is too loud. I am going to take a cab home. I am going to sleep. In the morning, I am going to forget this place exists. You may leave, Ethan said, but you will not take a cab that I do not control, and you will not sleep in an apartment whose front door lock has 3 copies in pockets that are not yours. The protest rose and died in the same breath. He had the frightening habit of answering the words I was about to say. Nick's phone lit beneath his palm. He glanced, then looked at Ethan. The service captain has given a name, he said. It is the name we expected. Ethan's jaw shifted by a small degree. The temperature in the room changed by a smaller one. See to it, he said. Tessa flinched, and I realized that she had come to me bright with perfume and plans, not because she loved a dangerous night, but because she had already been living inside the shadow of one. Ethan turned back to me. You will not believe what I tell you. Not tonight. That is reasonable. So I will offer you something you can believe. He gestured toward the hallway. You will walk to the service elevator with your sister. You will ride down with Nick. He will take you to a car that will take you home. It will not stop. It will not detour. 2 men will ride behind it until you are inside your building. Another will watch your door until morning. If you see anything that does not belong on your street, you will call the number that is already in your phone. I have news on the laters. I glanced at my clutch on the low table where I had set it when I first woke. I had not taken my phone out since my apartment. I had not given anyone permission to touch it. Ethan seemed to catch the spark of fury as it tried to light. Your phone is where you left it, he said. I did not put anything in it. I did not take anything out, but your sister did. The number is hers. It rings to me. Tessa's chin lifted again, proud and stricken. I was not going to let you drown quietly, she said. Not this time. There it was, the old argument, wearing a new dress. She saved me without asking. I punished her by refusing to call that salvation anything but betrayal. The night was very tired of us. Ethan moved toward the door and opened it. The gesture was not a dismissal. It was an ending and a beginning offered in the same open palm. Tomorrow, he said, and the word arrived like an invitation written in a hand I recognized and did not. You will wake up and choose the story you believe. If it is the one where I am the villain, I have been called worse by men who deserve the title more. If it is the one where your sister is a traitor, you will be very lonely. If it is the one where the world is more dangerous than you allowed, then you will call that number, and I will answer. It's of hard love. I should have walked past him without looking up. Instead, I met his eyes and found nothing there that I could use as a weapon. Only that terrible patience again, and the quiet certainty of a man who never begged, not even for the truth to hurry. Nick was already in the hall. Tessa brushed my arm, a question disguised as contact. I let her touch remain. We walked between the photographs and the measured lights, our heels soft on the carpet that men like Ethan lay down to keep women like me from hearing the footsteps behind us. In the service elevator, the mirrored steel turned us into strangers. Tessa stared at the floor numbers like they were a prayer. Nick stood with his hands behind his back, the posture of someone who knew exactly how much space his body took up in a crisis. My pulse had finally returned to a rhythm that belonged to me. When the doors opened, the air tasted different. Not cleaner, just honest. The back corridors of a palace are always where the truth lives. Outside, the night was cooler, the alley lined with shadow and the purr of engines that looked expensive enough to apologize for their own noise. A black sedan waited with its door open. Nick gestured. I slid in first, Tessa after me. He leaned down, and for the first time his professional mask softened into something almost human. Lock the door behind you when you go in, he said. Do not open it for anyone until morning. If you must open it, make the call first. We do not use words like always and never, but tonight we pretend we do. He shut the door. The car pulled away. In the rear window, the mirage receded into a ribbon of light, then a bruise against the city's glittering skin. Tessa's hand was tight around mine. My throat ached with all the sentences I refused to say. The driver did not look at us in the mirror. The route the car took was straight and without invention. When he stopped in front of my building, two silhouettes detached themselves from the darker edges of the street. They were not men I knew, and I did not want to know them. They watched while we went in, and the lobby's old fluorescent hum welcomed us back to a life that, 10 hours ago, had seemed small and now felt like a country I was not sure I could still afford. Inside my apartment, I threw the deadbolt, then the chain, then set the security bar like a woman building a ritual out of metal. The divorce envelope lay where I had left it, a white island on the kitchen table. Tessa stood looking at it as if it might open its mouth and sing. Her mascara had smudged just enough to make her eyes honest. You can hate me tonight, she said. You can hate me tomorrow, but do not forget to breathe between the two. I should have told her to leave. I should have sent her into the hall with the men and the rules and the shadows. Instead, I nodded toward the couch. She curled into it like a child who had been told she was safe by someone who could make it true. I went to my bedroom and turned the lock, not to keep her out, but to keep the night from entering through my fear. Sleep did not come cleanly. It arrived in slices that tasted of cedar and red light, and a man saying the word tomorrow as if it were a door I could open without being pushed. When I woke, the apartment was gray with early morning. I lay very still and listened for sounds that did not belong. All I heard was the refrigerator's faithful hum and the small sigh my own body makes when it realizes it is not going to cry. I reached for my phone. No new messages, no missed calls. One contact pinned at the top that had not been there yesterday, its name the simplest possible lie, service. I stared at it until the letters dissolved. I did not press it. I placed the phone face down and stood. The floor cool beneath my feet. The room smelling faintly of lipstick and fear and the future. Down the hall, Tessa was asleep on the couch, one hand under her cheek like the child she had once been, the other still holding the strap of her purse as if some part of her planned to run even while she dreamed. I covered her with a blanket, not because she deserved it or because she did not, but because love is a muscle and it atrophies when you do not use it. At the kitchen table, the envelope waited. I traced the edge with the side of my finger, the way you test a blade to see if it will cut. The paper held still. Outside, the city exhaled. Somewhere a club was being cleaned. Somewhere a man gave an order and another man carried it out. Somewhere a door I did not want opened into a corridor I did not understand, and at the end of that corridor stood someone who had told me that I would choose my story when the sun rose. The light found the window. It was not kind. It was honest. I sat, folded my hands on the table like a woman about to pray, and listened to the quiet until it told me the only truth it had. Morning comes whether or not you invite it. And when it does, you either answer or you pretend you do not hear your name. The morning after the mirage was a kind of silence I had never known, one that hummed with everything left unsaid. The city beyond my window was moving, unaware that my world had shifted in ways I could not yet name. Tessa was still asleep on the couch, her knees pulled toward her chest beneath the blanket I had thrown over her. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile even, though I knew better than anyone that my sister was a storm disguised as a woman. I stood at the counter staring at the coffee maker as if it might decide for me whether to stay angry or simply collapse. The smell of coffee filled the apartment, grounding and unreal at once. When I finally handed her a mug, she blinked awake, her eyes ringed in smudged makeup, and gave me a smile that was all apology and no regret. "You're up early," she said, her voice scratchy from sleep. I never really went to sleep. The mug clinked softly against the table as she set it down. "You're mad." "I'm past mad," I said. "Mad is for people who still think they can fix something." "You drugged me, Tessa." Her head snapped up. "I didn't." "Don't," I said, cutting her off. "Don't lie to me when I can still taste the champagne in my mouth." She exhaled through her nose, the sound sharp and familiar. "It wasn't me. Someone slipped it in after I ordered. Ethan Blake figured that out before I did." "Ethan Blake," I repeated, the name heavy on my tongue. "You say it like we both know him." Her eyes softened. "I do. You don't. Yet." "That's not an explanation." She rubbed her temples with her fingertips, as if the right words were hiding behind her eyes. "Ryan got himself in deep with people he shouldn't have. When the marriage started falling apart, he tried to move money that didn't belong to him. People noticed. Dangerous people. When they realized some of the accounts were in your name, they came looking for you." I froze. "You're saying Ryan's debts are my problem now?" "They were always going to be," she said quietly. "You just didn't know it. I found out through a friend. I went to Ethan for help because he's the only one who could keep them off you. And he agreed to help what if you handed me to him?" Her eyes flickered toward the window. "He said he'd make sure you were safe." "By drugging me and locking me in his office?" My voice rose despite myself. "You call that safe?" Tessa flinched, then steadied herself. "You have no idea what those people would have done if they'd found you first." "No," I said, stepping closer. "I have no idea because you didn't tell me. You decided for me, you and Ethan Blake both." She stood then, setting her mug down hard enough that a line of coffee bled over the rim. "I made the only choice I had. You were my sister, Ava. You were falling apart. You were still crying over a man who had already sold your name to criminals. I wasn't going to wait for them to come knocking." "Then you should have trusted me enough to tell me," I said. "You should have let me decide who I wanted to be afraid of." She didn't answer. The apartment filled again with the hum of the refrigerator, the small, useless noise that always came when life tried to pretend it was normal. Tessa walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside. Outside, 2 black cars were parked across the street, tinted windows glinting in the weak morning light. "They've been there since dawn," she said. The bottom dropped out of my stomach. "You think they're his?" She turned back toward me. "No. His people would have told me. These are someone else's." I looked at her, my heart thudding. "Then who?" "The ones Ryan stole from," she said. "The Delgado Syndicate." The name hit me like a door closing. "And what exactly do they want with me?" "They think you know where the money went." "I don't." "I know," she said. "But they don't care. They only care that your name was on those transfers. That's why I had to fey." The knock at the door cut her off. It wasn't a neighbor's knock or the soft tap of a delivery. It was a single, deliberate strike. Then another. A rhythm that meant patience and power. My pulse surged. Tessa moved first, pulling her phone from her purse. "Go to your room. I'm not hiding in—" "Go," she hissed. There was no hesitation in her voice, no space for argument. I went. From the narrow crack of my bedroom door, I saw her glance through the peephole and freeze. Then she opened the door halfway. The man standing there was the same one from the club. Nick Torres, broad-shouldered, expression unreadable, the kind of stillness that made the air bend around him. Miss Collins, he said with a polite nod, Mr. Blake requests your presence. I'm not going anywhere with him, I said, stepping into view. Nick's gaze flicked toward me, assessing, then back to Tessa. It isn't safe here anymore. They've already located your building. My team neutralized one of their scouts an hour ago. The words neutralized and scout tangled in my mind, too calm for what they meant. You're saying they were watching us? More than that, he said. They were preparing to move. My mouth went dry. And Ethan sent you? Yes, Nick said. He doesn't want them getting to you first. Tessa turned to me. You see, I told you. I wanted to scream, to hit something, to run. Instead, I looked from her to Nick and back again. If I go with you, what happens? You'll be safe, Nick said simply. Mr. Blake wants to talk to you. Nothing more. Safe, I repeated, the word tasting like iron. That's what she said last night. Tessa's eyes pleaded. Please, Ava, just talk to him. You need to understand what's really happening. Nick's phone buzzed. He checked it, then pocketed it again. We need to leave. Now. I glanced at Tessa, then at the window. The 2 black cars were still there. One of them had a man leaning against it, pretending to smoke, his eyes fixed on the building. I could feel his gaze even from here. My choices narrowed until they were a single thread. Stay and wait for whatever was outside that door, or step back into the orbit of a man who terrified me in ways I could not explain. Fine, I said, but I'm not going anywhere without her. Nick inclined his head once, as if that were acceptable. Then both of you come. And no is brevis that. He led us down the hall and into the waiting elevator. The descent felt endless. When the doors opened, the air in the lobby was thick with something invisible tension, perhaps, or the knowledge that we were being watched. The black sedan waited at the curb, the same kind of vehicle that had taken me home the night before. The driver opened the door. Tessa slid in first. I followed. The ride was silent except for the sound of tires over wet asphalt. I stared out the window, watching the city blur past, until the skyline shifted from familiar streets to glass towers I didn't recognize. When the car finally stopped, Nick stepped out and opened my door. We were in front of a tall building I hadn't noticed before, its entrance unmarked, except for a discreet security keypad and a man who looked too alert to be ornamental. Nick entered a code, and the door unlocked with a soft click. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar again. The elevator ride-up was smoother, faster. My stomach tightened as the doors opened to reveal Ethan Blake waiting in the same immaculate suit, his presence filling the space like gravity. He looked at me, then at Tessa, then back to me. Miss Collins, he said. You didn't sleep. Was that part of your plan too? I asked. He smiled slightly, though there was no humor in it. No, you staying alive is my plan. Tessa stepped forward. They were outside her building. Nick saw them. And this? Ethan's expression didn't change. I know. That's why you're here. I crossed my arms, fighting the urge to retreat. Why me? Why would they come after me for something Ryan did? Because Ryan Carter transferred over $2 million through accounts with your name on them, Ethan said. The Delgado Syndicate doesn't care who did it. They only care about where it went. And you know this how? Because they're my competitors, he said simply. And they're reckless. They think taking you will make him come out of hiding. He's not hiding, I said bitterly. He's gone. Maybe, Ethan said, but they don't know that. And until they do, you're their leverage. The room seemed to shrink. Tessa made a small sound beside me, part sob, part curse. Ethan walked to the window, the skyline glittering behind him like a weapon. You have 2 options, Miss Collins. Go back to that apartment and wait for them to knock again. Or stay here under my protection. Breeze. I don't need your protection. He turned. Everyone needs protection from something. Why? I asked. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Something flickered in his eyes, something I didn't understand. Maybe I do. The words hit me harder than I expected. For a second, I saw something else beneath his control, recognition, maybe, or memory. I didn't know which frightened me more. I don't trust you. I said finally. That's wise, he replied. Trust isn't part of the deal. Then what is? Time, he said. A few days until we can make sure the people looking for you are redirected. Redirected, I repeated. You mean killed? I mean handled, he said evenly. The method doesn't concern you. It concerns me if it's my name they're dying over. He studied me then, long and slow, until I could feel the air thickening between us. You're a very brave woman, Miss Collins, he said, or a very foolish one. Either way, you're alive, and that's more than Ryan Carter can say. The words sliced through the room. My knees nearly buckled. What did you just say? Ethan's voice softened, but not with mercy. Your ex-husband is dead. He's been dead for weeks. The Delgados found what was left of him near the docks. I shook my head, refusing it. You're lying. I don't lie about corpses, he said. They don't require imagination. The floor felt unsteady again, like the club's flashing lights had followed me here. I turned toward Tessa, but she was staring at the floor, her face pale. You knew, I whispered. You knew and you didn't tell me. I wanted to, she said, tears spilling over now. But I couldn't. They would have come after you sooner if you had gone looking for him. I backed away from both of them, the wall cold against my spine. All of this last night, the club, the drink was to keep me here, to keep you alive, Ethan said. Alive for what? I demanded. So you can own me like you own everyone else? He didn't move, didn't flinch. You're not mine, Ava. You never were. But right now, you're under my roof, and that makes you my responsibility. That's the only currency I deal in. The room was too small for all the things I wanted to scream. Instead, I sank onto the nearest chair, my hands trembling. Tessa reached for me, but I pulled away. You should go, I said. Ava, go. She hesitated, then nodded, eyes glistening. Nick appeared as if summoned, opening the door for her. When she was gone, the quiet returned, thicker than before. Ethan stood by the window again, his reflection cut by city lights. You don't have to like me, he said. But if you want to see another sunrise, you'll stay where I can find you. I stared at him, the man who had stepped out of the shadows of my sister's lies and my ex-husband's sins, and realized that whether I wanted it or not, my life now belonged to the war he fought in silence. The envelope on my kitchen table had ended one story, but this was where another began. The first day inside Ethan Blake's world was a study in edges. Edges of glass and steel. Edges of conversations that stopped just before they reached the truth. Edges of my own patience, frayed and thin. I had expected locks, bars, some overt proof of captivity. What I found instead was a space so open it made me dizzy. A penthouse that floated above the city, like a ship made of shadow and light. Floor-to-ceiling windows curved along 2 entire walls. The skyline poured itself in, gold by day and electric blue by night. The air smelled of cedar and rain. Ethan showed me to a bedroom that looked like a hotel suite in a country I could not afford. Cream walls, soft rugs, a bed that could hold a kingdom. This is yours, he said, standing in the doorway with his hands in his pockets. You may use the kitchen, the library, the terrace. You are not a prisoner. I wanted to laugh. You say that as if you expect me to believe it. His eyes met mine, dark and still. Believe what you like, but I am not in the business of cages. I can't. He closed the door behind him, and I was alone with the sound of my own heart beating against the walls. I tried the handle. It turned easily. The door opened onto a hallway that led back to the main living space. Beyond that was a kitchen with marble counters, an empty dining table, and, beyond that, a library whose shelves climbed the walls like trees. No guards in sight, no locks on the window, but something invisible moved through the air security you could not see but felt anyway, a system of eyes and sensors humming like an unseen hive. Freedom dressed up as luxury. I walked to the window and pressed my palms against the glass. The city unrolled below me like a map I no longer knew how to read. Somewhere down there was my apartment, my bookstore, my old life. From up here, they looked like tiny toys. The door behind me opened. "You're exploring," Ethan said. "I'm looking for the exit," I replied without turning. "It's behind you," he said. "Elevator at the end of the hall. You can take it whenever you want, but if you walk out of this building without an escort, you will not make it to the curb." I turned. "That sounds a lot like a cage." "It's a shield," he said evenly, "until the Delgado Syndicate loses interest in you." "I never asked for your shield." "No," he said, "but you walked into their sights the day Ryan Carter put your name on his transfers. That choice wasn't yours either." He was still in the same suit from the night before, but his tie was gone, his sleeves rolled back to his forearms. Tattoos wrapped around his wrists, black ink and geometry, the kind of design that looked older than his skin. I noticed his hands large, precise, as if they were used to building things and breaking them in equal measure. "Why do you care?" I asked. "You could have left me at the club. You could have let them take me. I'm nothing to you." Something flickered in his face so small I might have imagined it. "You're not nothing," he said. He stopped himself, adjusted the cuff of his shirt. "You're a problem I can solve." I wanted to be furious, but the honesty in his tone unsettled me more than any pretty lie. Days began to blur. I moved through the penthouse like a ghost, eating alone, reading in the library, pretending not to notice the quiet presence of Nick Torres somewhere beyond each door. Ethan left each morning in a storm of phone calls and returned at night calm and collected, as if the city bent itself back into order before he came home. He never demanded my company, but he never left me entirely alone either. Sometimes, when I wandered into the kitchen, he was already there, making coffee, his movements precise and silent. Other times I found him in the library, standing before a shelf as if he were reading the spines like tarot cards. One evening I found him at the piano near the far wall, his fingers resting on the keys without pressing them. "You play?" I asked before I could stop myself. "Not well," he said. "My mother tried to teach me. I preferred numbers." "You surprise me." That's the point," he said softly. "Surprise keeps people from guessing what you'll do next." He didn't look at me when he spoke. His profile in the window's reflection was sharper than I remembered. High cheekbones, a jaw cut by decisions, eyes that looked out over the city as if they owned it and mourned it at once. "You don't have to stay in your room all the time," he said. "The terrace is safe. The pool, the gym, all of it. Take it." "I don't want your gifts." "Insane also." "They're not gifts," he said. "They're already here." Silence filled the room. It was not uncomfortable, just dense. He was the kind of man who could sit in silence without needing to fill it, and that unnerved me more than any threat. That night, I dreamed of running. Not from Ethan, but through his world, the marble floors stretching beneath my bare feet like a labyrinth. In the dream, I stopped at the edge of the library where the shelves curved into shadow. He stood there waiting, not moving, his hands in his pockets. When I woke, the room was dark, the sheets cool, and I could still smell cedar. The next morning, I found a dress draped over a chair near the window. Simple, black, cut like a question. No note, no explanation. I left it there. At breakfast, Ethan glanced at it once, then at me, but said nothing. Later, as I wandered into the library, I found him sitting in the leather chair by the window. He was reading a book in Italian, a language I did not know. He closed it when he saw me. "You're restless," he said. "I'm thinking. About leaving. About surviving." He tilted his head. "They're the same thing right now." I crossed my arms. "You keep talking like I have a choice." "You do," he said. "But your choices come with consequences. So do mine. The difference is I'm used to mine." Something in his tone drew me closer despite myself. "And what are your consequences, mister?" "Blake?" He smiled faintly. "You'll find out if you stay long enough." His eyes met mine then, and for a moment the world felt suspended. No music, no guards, no danger, just two people in a room built for someone else's life. The intensity in his gaze was not hunger or power, but recognition, as if he were looking at something he had been waiting to see. I looked away first. "I don't understand you." "You're not supposed to," he said. "Understanding comes later. As things us." Later, when? When you stop running. His words landed like a promise and a threat at once. That night, I stood at the window of my bedroom, looking out over the city. The lights below flickered like signals I could not decode. Somewhere out there were men who wanted me dead, a sister who had lied to save me, and a past I could not outrun. Somewhere inside this apartment was a man who had built a fortress without walls and who had begun to pull me inch by inch into his gravity. For the first time since the divorce papers, I felt something other than numbness. It wasn't safety. It wasn't trust. It was a dangerous electric awareness, the kind that hums just before a storm breaks. Behind me, I heard the soft click of a door closing. I turned, but the room was empty. Only the scent of cedar lingered, and the knowledge that I was no longer sure which of us was the hunter and which was the one being hunted. The first sign was small and humiliatingly ordinary. The coffee that had steadied me each morning since the world came apart turned my stomach with a sudden violence that felt like betrayal. I pressed a hand to the marble counter and breathed slowly through my nose, counting heartbeats the way my mother taught me to do when I was a child, afraid of thunderstorms. The nausea ebbed, then swelled again, an undertow I could not predict. I poured the coffee down the sink and watched the dark ribbon circle the drain until it disappeared, as if that would take the truth with it. I told myself it was stress. I told myself it was the altitude of glass and fear. I told myself 100 polite lies and lined them up like soldiers in my mind, then watched them fall one by one to the simplest possibility: late. Not by much. Enough to make the room tilt the way it had in the mirage. But this time there was no drug, only the cruel arithmetic of a body that did not ask permission. I found the small guest bathroom at the end of the hall, the one that felt least like it belonged to Ethan Blake. The overhead light buzzed softly, a sound like patience. I opened the cabinet with hands that were steady because I refused to let them shake, and I was absurdly grateful for the neat rows of everything a person might need, as if the apartment anticipated emergencies and chose to meet them with abundance. 3 white boxes waited like mute witnesses. I took one and locked the door. Time slowed to a viscous crawl. The instructions were insulting in their simplicity. The result was not. 2 lines appeared before I could take a breath. Pale at first, then sure. I stared until the edges of the room softened and the mirror began to feel like a door I could not walk through. The sound I made was small and animal. I covered my mouth with my hand to keep it from escaping into the hall where it might become real. I sat on the closed lid of the toilet with the test on the counter and counted backwards through the last weeks, as if I could undo them by naming them. The night he had stood at the piano and confessed that numbers were his first language. The mornings he had passed me coffee without asking if I wanted it. The way he had waited for me to choose a seat across from him at the long table rather than dictate where I would sit. The look in his eyes when he said stay and meant live. The quiet between us that had become a place rather than a punishment. The night I had crossed it. A child is not a theory. A child is a weight and a light all at once. It is a fork in a life that cannot be ignored. It is a set of doors that open onto rooms you cannot foresee. It is also a stake, a claim, a bond, a word that men like Ethan turn over in their hands to find where it shines and where it cuts. I pressed my palm against my belly as if I could shield something the size of a sigh from a world of steel and glass. I thought of Tessa's voice, thin with righteousness and fear. I thought of Ryan's signature in black ink beside mine. I thought of the way power had a scent in this place, cedar and control, and how I had begun to recognize the difference between being protected and being possessed. I had been learning to breathe again in rooms designed for someone else's life. The test on the counter said that life was over. I rinsed the plastic strip beneath the tap as if water could wash away meaning. I tucked it into the pocket of my sweater with a compulsion that felt superstitious and foolish. I unlocked the door and stepped into the hall. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that suggests a man who runs an empire is elsewhere, bending the city into a shape that pleases him. On the console table near the elevator, a small white card sat beneath a silver paperweight in the shape of a knot. I recognized Ethan's handwriting at once. Clean, economical, a geometry of certainty. Meeting runs long, eat something, the kitchen staff stock the fridge, use what you like. It would have been easier if he had been cruel. It always is. Kindness complicates escape because it drags gratitude behind it like a chain. I folded the card in half and then in half again and slid it into my other pocket as if balancing the weight of the test on the right side of me. My hands needed symmetry where my life did not have any. I walked to the library because I could not bear the bedroom where the bed looked like a promise and the window made the whole city feel like an accusation. The library smelled of leather and paper and the faint metallic tang of the skyscraper's air. The shelves reached up like prayer, and I stood beneath them thinking of the girl who had hid in borrowed stories to avoid a marriage she could not salvage, and of the woman who had let fear feel like certainty in a room where a man had offered both a cage and a shield and a space between that had felt treacherously like choice. The plan assembled itself with the terrible elegance of inevitability. Not a plan, exactly, but the outline of one, the kind you recognize, because your body begins to move before your mind admits to it. I had noticed the rhythm of this place. I had noticed more than I had intended to notice. The way the night staff changed at 10 and at 2. The half hour when the elevator cars paused on the service level while the routes were reset in the control system. The brief window when the external cameras pivoted to recalibrate and the internal ones flickered a frame behind the present. I had told myself I was not planning anything, I was lying then, I was telling the truth now. I went to the dressing room and took the kind of clothes that do not look like a mistake. Dark jeans, flat shoes, a sweater with deep pockets, and a hem that fell below my hips. I braided my hair back tight the way I had in college when late-night study sessions bled into morning. I took nothing that would announce itself as leaving. My phone. My wallet. The small stash of cash I had hidden in the spine of a book in the second row of the third shelf, because survival is a muscle and mine had memory. On my way back through the bedroom, I stopped with my hand on the doorframe, pinned in place by the sudden urge to leave something behind that would explain everything and nothing. A note is a confession. A note is an apology. A note is a target. I stood there for a full minute and then I did what women do when there is no safe choice. I chose the one that protected the thing that could not protect itself. I left nothing. The apartment was darker now. The lights outside began their long, slow drift toward midnight blue. The city shone like a sea turned inside out. I moved through the rooms with the quiet of a thief who owns the house in a version of the future that will not exist. At the far end of the gallery, a narrow door looked like a seam in the wall. It opened onto a service corridor that smelled like paint and cold air. The cameras here were the kind that did not announce themselves. I knew where they were anyway. I looked down and counted steps in silence. 23 to the gray metal stair, 2 flights that doubled back on themselves, the hum of a machine deeper in the building that had taught me to time my breaths. At the landing between the 2 flights, a panel held an emergency call button and a laminated card with building protocols for situations that would never use the human words fear and escape. I pressed my palm to the cool wall and felt its quiet. When I was certain there was only my heartbeat and the thin hum of the building, I moved again. On the service level, the light was a cruel fluorescent. A metal door led to the loading bay. Another led to a tunnel that connected to the adjacent tower for emergencies that rich men prefer not to discuss. The half-hour window had begun before I stepped into the corridor. I heard it in the way air changed pressure. I felt it in the way a hallway becomes briefly empty of people who move packages and private lives with the same indifferent competence. I turned right, not left. Left was the place I had once watched Nick step through with a guard at his shoulder. Right was the place I had watched a woman in a housekeeping uniform disappear with a basket full of white towels and reappear with nothing but the keys on her belt. The door she used was not the main one. It was the one with the scuffed paint at the bottom where something heavy had been dragged through too often. It opened for me because it opened for anyone with a hand and a need. Cold air slid over my face like a warning and a blessing. The alley behind the building smelled of wet concrete and engine heat. I stood still and listened with every piece of myself that knew how to listen. A car idling somewhere to the left. A bottle settling in a bin to the right. Distant laughter from a bar that belonged to another set of lives. No footsteps, no voices. I exhaled, and in the breath I understood why people pray. I moved the way you move when you do not want to be seen, and you cannot bear to act like prey. Head up, pace measured, purse strap across your body, eyes alert but not frantic. The city was a series of judgments, and tonight I intended to pass as someone who knew where she was going. I did not. I was going away. That was enough. At the corner, I turned without looking back, because looking back is a way of calling your name into the dark. I found the subway entrance not because I planned to take it, but because where there is a subway, there are taxis. I lifted my arm, and the second cab stopped because the driver had a face that remembered a daughter and a woman late at night and the feeling of wanting home. "Where to?" he asked. "South Station," I said, naming the train terminal in a city that had never been kind to me and had no obligation to be kind now. He pulled into traffic, and the noise of the avenue swallowed the quiet that had lived beneath my skin for days. The car's heater coughed, then settled into a steady breath. I pressed my fingers into the soft ache low in my belly. A gesture I told myself was instinct rather than sentiment. The cab turned east, and the building that housed Ethan Blake fell behind us like a fact that would not change even if I did. I thought of what would happen when he found the absence of me where I had been. The cameras would play back a woman in dark clothing, moving like a shadow. The security system would mark the doors that opened, and the minutes they remained so. Nick would say a word like impossible and mean inconvenient. Men would be fired. Someone might disappear. Ethan would not yell. He would not storm. He would sit very still and examine the night as if it were a ledger, and then he would do what he always did. He would correct the math. The train station opened before us like a rib cage lit from within. I paid the driver in cash and told him to keep the change, my voice steady because fear had burned through to something cleaner. I stepped into the cavern of arrivals and departures. The loudspeaker announced a destination I did not choose. People moved in purposeful lines. The smell of pretzels and oil and human ambition rose around me. I bought a ticket to the first place that felt like anonymity in a syllable. Providence. The word tasted cautious and ironic. I took it anyway. On the platform, the air was a blade. I stood in it and let it cut me into a woman who would not be found. I knew I was lying to myself. The world contains men who can find anyone. The plastic test in my pocket felt hot as a secret. I curled my hand around it as if that could convince it to become a talisman instead of a truth. The train arrived with a shudder and a cry like metal remembering fire. I climbed the steps and chose a seat that faced backward because I wanted to watch the city recede rather than fling myself at whatever waited. The car was half full. A college girl with purple headphones slept with her mouth open. A man in a suit scrolled through the news, his eyes tired and bright. A couple in their 60s shared a paper bag of something that smelled like oranges and memory. As the train slid out of the station, the lights of the city broke into lines, then stars, then nothing at all. I pressed my forehead to the cold window and tried to imagine a life built of small rooms and real names and the kind of fear that does not have teeth. The glass fogged with my breath and cleared and fogged again, a rhythm that felt like mercy. In the reflection, I saw my own face, made older by a night that had not yet ended. Behind my shoulder, for a heartbeat that could have been a trick of light, I thought I saw the shape of a man who stood with his hands in his pockets and the patience of a weather system. I turned, and there was no one there but the conductor moving down the aisle with the slow authority of a person who knows where the tracks lead. I closed my eyes and promised the small invisible future inside me that I would be more than brave. I would be relentless. I would be quiet where quiet kept us safe, and loud where loud opened doors. I would learn new names and teach them to my child until they felt like skin. I would walk away from anything that sounded like ownership and toward everything that felt like choice. When the train curved south, the city loosened its grip. I felt the ghost of a hand release mine and knew it was not a surrender, only a postponement. There are men you do not escape so much as outwait. There are lives you do not end so much as begin again in a language the past does not speak. The night deepened around the car. The rhythm of the tracks became a lullaby for people who had none. I tasted salt and did not know if it was from tears or the metal of fear on my tongue. I did not wipe my face. I let it be what it was. The next station lights rose in the distance like a congregation of small suns. I sat up straighter and tucked the test deeper into my pocket, a foolish talisman, a stubborn truth. Behind us, somewhere in the high glass and quiet leather, a man would be standing at a window looking at a city that obeyed him and realizing that one small thing had not. Ahead of us, a smaller city waited with fewer questions and cheaper rent, and a hospital that would ask for a name I would give it without flinching. Between the two stretched the length of a single night, and I traveled it with my hand over my heart and my other hand steady on the life that had already begun to rewrite me. When the train pulled into the next station, the door opened with a sigh. I stepped down into the cold and did not look back. The first years after I left Ethan Blake were built out of small, deliberate silences. I learned to live inside them, to build a rhythm out of quiet the way other people built it from noise. I chose a name that did not catch in anyone's memory, rented an apartment in a town where no one looked twice at a single mother with tired eyes, and told the world that Ava Collins had never existed. Catherine Hayes did, though. Catherine owned a small bookstore on the edge of Boston, a narrow space tucked between a florist and a cafe that always smelled of cinnamon. The sign above the door read, "Lily's Books," named for the flower I had once believed was delicate, until I learned how easily it thrived in unlikely soil. I told the locals it was my mother's name. It wasn't. But lies are less dangerous when they come wrapped in sentiment. The store never made much money, but it gave me something better, peace disguised as purpose. Every morning I unlocked the glass door, flipped the sign from closed to open, and breathed in the scent of paper and coffee. I stocked the shelves myself, alphabetizing by instinct, losing track of time among the stories that had once been my only escape. The customers were few and kind teachers, old men, mothers buying picture books for their children. None of them ever asked about my past, and I never offered it. Lila filled the spaces between those hours. She was born 2 months after I reached Boston, a small, dark-haired miracle who screamed her way into the world and then clung to my finger as if she had always known who I was. The nurses told me she was strong for her size. I believed them. I had no choice but to. For 5 years, it was just us. Mornings began with cereal and cartoons, afternoons with books and crayons, evenings with bedtime stories whispered under the soft glow of a lamp shaped like a moon. I read to her about dragons and explorers, about children who found hidden doors and mothers who crossed oceans. She liked the stories where no one was entirely good or entirely bad. She said those felt real. Her laughter was a sound that filled the apartment so completely that sometimes I forgot there had ever been silence before it. Her eyes were a deep, unnameable brown, so much like his that there were nights I couldn't look at her without feeling the weight of what I'd left behind. I told myself that resemblance was a coincidence, an echo without consequence. I told myself many things. The first time Lila fainted, she was 3. One moment she was coloring at the kitchen table, the next she slumped sideways, her crayon rolling across the floor. Panic made my vision blur. At the hospital, the doctor spoke in careful tones about anemia and blood counts and transfusions, words that felt too big to fit inside my daughter's small body. I listened, nodded, asked questions that meant nothing, and signed forms that meant everything. After that, the visits became routine. Blood tests, treatments, small victories, and smaller setbacks. The staff at New Haven Medical Center knew us by name. Lila charmed them all, of course. She called the nurses by their first names and drew pictures for the doctors. Her courage shamed me sometimes. She faced needles with the same stubborn calm I had once mistaken for bravery. I told them her father was a one-night mistake, a name I couldn't remember. The lie came easily after the first time. It was safer that way for her, for me, for the fragile world I had built on the ruins of another. Sometimes, late at night, when the city was quiet and the radiator hissed softly in the corner, I would imagine what might happen if Ethan ever found us. I pictured him the way I remembered him standing in the half-light of his penthouse, sleeves rolled to his elbows, eyes like a question I could never answer. I wondered if he'd changed, if the city still bent to him, if he had forgotten the woman who disappeared one night without a word. Then I'd look at Lila sleeping beside me, her hand curled against her cheek, and I'd remind myself that the past was a country we could never return to. I had crossed its border once and barely survived. The seasons turned, the store survived on the loyalty of a few regulars and the kindness of strangers. I taught Lila to read using the same battered children's books I had loved. She preferred dragons to princesses, mysteries to fairy tales. She asked questions about everything, why the moon changed shape, why leaves fell, why her father wasn't around. I told her the truth I could bear, that he didn't know about her, that he was far away, that sometimes people love each other in ways that hurt too much to stay. She seemed to accept it, though sometimes she'd stare at me with those dark eyes, thoughtful and ancient, and I'd feel the walls of my careful life tremble. By the time she turned 5, the doctors had started talking about new options, new trials, new hopes wrapped in sterile language. They mentioned the possibility of a bone marrow transplant, but matching donors were rare, they said, especially for her blood type. I nodded and smiled and told them to keep looking. Inside, I prayed to a God I didn't believe in, that the universe would finally give us a little mercy. That mercy came, as it always did in my life, disguised as something else. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, the kind of day that made the world seem clean again. The shop was empty, sunlight spilling through the front window onto stacks of unsold novels. Lila sat at a small table in the children's corner, coloring a picture of a dragon with a purple crayon. Her tongue stuck out in concentration, her hair falling across her eyes. "Mommy," she said without looking up, "can we get ice cream after my doctor's appointment tomorrow?" "If you're brave with the needle," I said, smiling. "I'm always brave," she said. Like the dragon. Before I could answer, the phone on the counter rang. I glanced at the caller ID. New Haven Medical Center. My chest tightened. I picked up. "Miss Hayes?" The voice on the other end was calm, professional. "This is Dr. Emily Harper. I wanted to let you know we may have found a donor match for Lila." For a second, I couldn't breathe. A match? Yes, a perfect one actually. We'll need to run additional tests, but the compatibility is remarkable. I leaned against the counter, my knees weak. That's wonderful. The donor has been contacted and has already agreed to the procedure. He's flying in tomorrow. The words didn't make sense at first. Flying in? Personally? Yes, she said. He seems quite motivated. We'll schedule the pre-transplant evaluation for tomorrow afternoon. Can you bring Lila in around 3? Of course, I said automatically. Thank you, Dr. Harper. When I hung up, the shop was silent again except for the scratch of crayon on paper. I stared at the phone, my pulse pounding in my ears. Donors weren't supposed to know the recipients' identities. It was anonymous, clinical, that was the rule. Someone flying in specifically for Lila wasn't normal. "Mommy?" Lila looked up, her eyes bright. "What did they say?" I knelt beside her, brushing a curl from her forehead. "They found someone who might make you better, sweetheart." Her smile was small and perfect. "See, I told you, dragons are lucky." I smiled back, but the dread coiled low in my stomach refused to fade. I knew the universe too well to trust coincidences. Perfect matches didn't just happen. That night, after I tucked her into bed, I sat by the window with a cup of tea gone cold and watched the city lights blur. I thought about the donor flying in, about the way Ethan's name had once sounded when spoken aloud, about the blood that ran in Lila's veins and the secrets that had built her life. It had been 5 years since I'd seen him, 5 years since I'd run, 5 years of pretending the past couldn't find me. But as I sat there in the quiet apartment above the bookstore, I felt it, an old, familiar presence, distant but certain, like thunder rolling somewhere just beyond the horizon. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure if what I felt was fear or inevitability. In Chicago, the afternoon laid its gold across glass and steel until the whole skyline looked like a promise fulfilled. Ethan Blake ended a meeting with the clean finality of a man who preferred decisions to discussions. Numbers had been moved, a hotel's quarterly report had been adjusted by a single surgical directive. A supplier who confused loyalty with habit had been corrected. The city, as usual, rearranged itself to fit the geometry in his head. He liked this hour, the time when noise softened and his office belonged to him again. The desk was immaculate, the leather chair sighed when he leaned back, and far below the lake threw light at the windows like a living thing. His private line vibrated once, a quiet insistence that belonged to a very short list of people. He glanced at the display, frowned at the unfamiliar Massachusetts area code, and let it ring a second longer than necessary before he picked up. Blake. Mr. Blake, a woman said, her tone clinical and careful, the cadence of someone used to delivering both hope and ruin. This is Dr. Emily Harper from New Haven Medical Center. Moster. He paused with the stillness that made other men mistake him for courteous. He was not courteous. He was precise. Go on. I apologize for contacting you directly, but our registry flagged your information as an immediate match for a pediatric patient in need of a bone marrow transplant. The match is rare, 10 out of 10. We do not often see this. He remembered the charity drive as one remembers a coat they wore in another winter. A polished event along the river, cameras, a blood pressure cuff cold on his arm, a technician telling him his HLA markers were unusual, then the forgettable paperwork that followed. Good optics, his legitimate advisors had said. He had not argued. Sometimes it pleased him to do the correct thing for reasons no one could calculate. And the patient, he said. Who is she? I am not permitted to disclose that information, doctor. Harper replied, and then, because she was a practical woman and understood the way certain doors opened, added, she is 5. The disease is a severe aplastic anemia. Without transplant, her prognosis is poor. With a perfect match, her chances improve dramatically. The word 5 opened a corridor in his mind he had locked without admitting he had. He did not walk down it. He merely stood at the threshold and measured the air. What is your timeline? He asked. As soon as possible, doctor, Harper said. The patient has been transfusion dependent for months. There are early signs of complications. If you are willing, we would like to begin donor workup tomorrow. We can arrange everything on our side. Tomorrow, he repeated, and watched the light slide across the lake like a hand smoothing fabric. He pressed the intercom with one finger. Nick. Yes, came the reply. Immediate, through the ceiling speakers. Nick Torres never made a man repeat himself. Wheels up in 90 minutes, Ethan said. Boston. Copy. He released the button. Text my office your contact details, he told Dr. Harper. I will be at your facility in the afternoon to complete whatever you require. There was the briefest pause, a soft exhale that belonged to a human being and not a hospital. Thank you, Mr. Blake. He ended the call and placed the phone on the desk like a piece in a game he no longer admitted he played. The silence that followed was not empty. It contained the past, coiled and patient as any predator. He stood, crossed to the window, and watched the city demonstrate its obedience. The lake's skin shivered, a gull crossed the pane at eye level and vanished. He opened the safe behind the abstract painting that had cost more than any canvas should and took out a single worn photograph that did not belong with bearer bonds and passports. A woman looked back at him from a summer 30 years gone, her hair pinned at the nape, her mouth curved into a private smile. He let himself look for as long as it took to know he would not be haunted by it tonight, then returned it to the envelope, closed the safe, and the painting swallowed the secret again. By the time he stepped into the outer office, Nick was already there. Dark suit, wire in one ear, phone in his hand, and 2 more conversations running behind his eyes. Flight plan filed, Nick said. Logan by 1900. I have a redundancy if we do not like the wind. Boston detail is spinning up. We will keep this quiet. Do not disturb the hospital, Ethan said. They run on routine. We do not make them remember us more than they have to. Nick nodded. He understood institutions. He also understood men. You think it is her. Ethan did not bother to pretend he did not know what Nick meant. He had surrounded himself with men who could keep up, not men who slowed the room down. I think the universe likes to demonstrate its appetite for symmetry, he said. Nick's mouth moved a fraction, almost a smile, almost a grimace. Then we plan for both versions, the one where it is chance, the one where it is not. Plan for the worst, Ethan said, and give the best our polite attention. In the elevator, the mirrored steel reproduced him twice, small and obedient. He ignored them. At street level, the car was already at the curb, idling as if engines were bred to wait for him. They were. Chicago slid past in a series of controlled reflections, the hotel marquee, the banker who had cried in his office last winter and thanked him for the privilege, the restaurant whose chef owed him 3 favors and a summer he had not yet called in. The city was a body, and he knew its pulse points. At the hangar, the jet sat with its steps already lowered, its white skin clean as bone. He liked planes for their refusal to be sentimental. A machine's mercy is function. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of leather and jet fuel, and the coffee, Nick insisted, tasted better at altitude. Ethan did not drink it. He did not intend to be awake in the ways the world could see him tonight. When they were above the weather, the city receding to a scratched coin in the dark, he closed his eyes and allowed the past its small procession. A woman in a black dress at a table above a dance floor. The way she steadied herself on the edge of the world and then chose not to fall. Her voice the night she said, "No one asked to be saved this way," and his answer, which had not been an apology. The door closing on a morning he had not yet learned to call a loss. He had looked, of course. He had looked with the quiet, thorough cruelty of a man who dislikes loose ends. For months after she left, he had replaced half his Chicago security apparatus with men who did not confuse diligence with visibility. He had asked questions that landed softly in the places where answers hide. He had listened for the sound her absence made. It is an odd truth that absence is not silence. It is a tone only certain animals hear. He had heard it and followed it to a dozen dead streets. Eventually, even a patient man recognizes a negative space as a design. He had stepped back and turned his attention to other wars. Now the phone call had reopened a door he thought he had bricked up. He did not pretend that the ache in his chest was surprise. It was relief, shaped like dread. The most efficient emotion, he found, was the one that borrowed a mask from another and finished the work. Logan was a cold mouth opening. The wind moved across the tarmac with the steady indifference of an ocean. Boston lay beyond it, a compact city that housed more secrets than its church spires suggested. The motorcade they did not call a motorcade slid onto the road as if it had been born there. In the backseat, Ethan watched the city flicker past brick, water, narrow streets that insisted on remembering their own past lives. He had done business here before, the kind that does not pay taxes. He knew which corners smiled at outsiders and which would swallow a man whole if he did not know their names. New Haven Medical Center rose from the intersection of money and mercy, the kind of hospital that soothed donors with glass and light while doing the work that never got easier. Nick handled the introductions, the badges, the respectful tone that suggested they had arrived through a door only some were allowed to use. Dr. Emily Harper met them in a conference room that looked like a board had once met there and promised a new wing if their names were carved into the marble in a large enough font. She was younger than he had expected and older than her face allowed, which is to say, she had spent nights in rooms where machines beat and parents prayed, and she had closed her eyes in the parking lot so she would not do it in front of them. Her handshake was firm. She did not waste movements. "Mr. Blake, thank you for coming. Tell me what you need," he said. She laid it out with the economy of someone who knew the cost of every word: donor workup in the lab across the hall, infectious disease screen, EKG, chest radiograph. History, consent. If the numbers remained clean, they would schedule the harvest within 48 hours. He signed where she asked him to sign. He bled into vials that lined up like a small red sentence. He stood for the radiograph and held his breath because a technician told him to. And when he exhaled, he thought about a girl breathing on the other side of this building and how the body is a democracy until it is a tyranny. Between departments, he read the hospital the way some men read faces. The paint was fresh where it needed to be. The hand sanitizer dispensers were full. The nurses walked like soldiers and mothers at once. Security was present, visible enough to be reassuring, not enough to be a dare. He saw what was not there too. No cameras where parents sobbed. No signage that turned suffering into a brand. He approved without saying so. In the lab, a phlebotomist with calm hands found the vein in one motion. "Not your first time," she said, admiring her own efficiency. He did not answer. The band tightened, the needle slid. Blood filled the tube with a slow, certain gravity. He watched the color because it gave his eyes something to do besides search for a shadow he would recognize even after 5 years. "Doctor," he said, when Dr. Harper returned with preliminary results already printing. "When? If infectious disease clears by morning, we could schedule you for harvest the day after," she said. "The recipient will begin conditioning immediately. Timing matters. The marrow does not like to wait." "Neither do I," he said. She hesitated, then a human pause in a professional mouth. "There is something else," she said. "The HLA match is so exact it suggests a familial relationship. A close one." He let the words land. They did not surprise him. They arranged the room into a shape that did not insult his intelligence. That would not be unusual, he said, and did not elaborate. Dr. Harper studied him the way a person studies a locked drawer, not prying, curious. "We maintain anonymity," she said, "both for you and for the family. But if you have any information that would change the medical history, now would be the time to share it." He thought of sharing as a currency, and then he thought of a small hand around a finger that had once been his, and a woman who had walked away carrying a future he had not been allowed to pay for. "The history will not surprise you," he said. "Healthy. No chronic disease, no medications, and at the rate ruins." "Good," she said, a word that felt like air after the underwater rooms of a hospital. "You will feel sore after harvest. Tired for a day or two. Most donors say it feels like falling down a flight of short stairs, but not breaking anything." She smiled, and it made her look briefly like a person who laughed at home and swore in traffic. "We try not to advertise it that way." He almost smiled back. "Almost. What time?" 7 in the morning, she said. "We will admit you at 6. I will be there." Nick walked him through the corridors as if they were streets in a city he intended to own. "Perimeter is clean," he said quietly. "No obvious interest. Still, I doubled the watch on this floor. Unobtrusive. Our friends have ears in this town. If the Delgados smell anything, they will come curious." "They will come hungry," Ethan said. "Curious is for men with time." At a window overlooking a garden stacked with late chrysanthemums and early fatigue, he stopped. The glass held his reflection, and for a moment he did not recognize the man looking back. He had added a scar since the night a woman in a black dress refused to be bought like an apology. He had added a patience that had cost him more than he admitted in rooms like this. He placed his hand to the glass and felt nothing but the cold invention of weather. "Find her," he said, so softly that another man might have mistaken the words for weather too. Nick did not ask who. He held Ethan's gaze in the reflection. "We are listening," he said, quietly. Ethan closed his eyes for the space of one breath, the way men like him pray when they do not intend to be caught. He opened them and left the window and the garden to people who could afford to pretend the world was made only of rooms like this. In the car, the city wound itself around them again. Brick, river, the smell of salt riding in off the harbor. He felt the city consider him and decide it did not own him and therefore would not try to. At the hotel, he refused to call a safe house. He showered, ate what Nick put in front of him without tasting it, and sat at the edge of the bed long enough to know he would not sleep. He stood instead and crossed to the window, another glass, another reflection. Somewhere across this compact city was a woman who had built herself quiet and called it a life. Somewhere in this building was a little girl with eyes he could not picture, and blood that had already betrayed her, and a body that might forgive her if his agreed to serve. He did not pace, he did not drink, he watched the night and allowed it to look back. When his phone vibrated again, it was not the hospital, but another of his lines, older, buried. A voice he had not heard in 5 years came through from a distance small enough to break a bone. "You are in my city," Tessa Collins said. "You took long enough." He did not waste her time with greetings. "Tell me where," he said. "Tomorrow," she replied. "You will see her tomorrow whether I speak or not." "Are you safe?" he asked. She laughed once, a sound he remembered from a hallway outside a club, bright and defiant and almost broken. "I am safer than you think," she said, "and not as safe as you want." The line went dead. He let the phone drop to his side and lifted his face to the window as if the glass might finally confess what it had witnessed for years. The city did not oblige. Cities rarely do. But in the reflection he thought, for the width of a breath, that he saw a woman turn toward him from a smaller window across town, her mouth set against fear, her hands steady on a small sleeping back. When dawn climbed the edge of the harbor, he was already dressed. Men like him are most themselves in the hours before other men wake. He checked his watch, not because he doubted the time, but because an old habit of discipline likes the feel of a second hand keeping its word. He left the room, and the day rose to meet him, and somewhere inside a hospital made of glass and hope, a child's chart waited for a signature that would look like his name and feel like something else entirely. New Haven Medical Center was designed to make you forget that fear has a smell. Light poured through high glass as if it could disinfect dread. Wails hung from the lobby ceiling in frozen migration. A child laughed near the play area with the stubborn, bell-clear sound of someone who has never learned the language of loss. I held Lila's hand and felt the small bones shift against my palm as if they were practicing being brave. She wore the purple sweater with the dragon embroidered over her heart. She believed in omens. I wanted to. "Do we get ice cream after?" she asked as we crossed to the elevator. "If you are brave," I said. "I am always brave," she answered, as if she were reporting the weather. The elevator lifted us with gentle efficiency to the 5th floor, where the world narrowed to white corridors and the low punctuation of monitors. Nurses moved with the alert tenderness of people who live where other people break. They knew us. They said Lila's name the way you say a blessing. I signed the intake forms with a hand that remembered rent checks and inventory lists and the dozen small rituals of our quiet life. The pen left my name where the hospital needed it. My heart remained in my daughter's fist. Dr. Emily Harper met us in the exam room. She held herself with that combination of kindness and steel I had come to trust, half science, half mother. She greeted Lila first, crouching to her height, admiring the dragon, asking about school and coloring books and which flavor of bravery we would be needing today. Then she stood and looked at me, and something in her eyes told me that the afternoon would not remain obedient to protocol. "Good news first," she said softly. "Our preliminary donor results are excellent. I would like to draw blood, repeat cross-matching, and get her to imaging. It will help us plan the timing." "How long will it take?" I asked. "An hour for the first round," she said, "perhaps a little more for the scan." Lila made a face. "Needles." "Just a pinch," Dr. Harper said, "like a dragon bite. I have it on good authority that you are braver than most dragons." Lila considered this and nodded solemnly. The nurse prepared the tray with the delicate choreography of a ritual. I held Lila's free hand and told her a story about a dragon who built a library out of hot stones so that the books would always be warm. She watched the needle with the frank stare of a child who refuses to be surprised. The nurse praised her. I kissed her hair and tasted the clean hospital scent that had become a second home and my private hell. When the vials were labeled and the bandage smoothed into place, Dr. Harper touched my elbow. "A word, Miss Hayes," she said. "Just outside." "As The hallway was quiet, that displaced quiet particular to hospitals where sound has meaning and everyone learns to walk softer as if volume could tip a scale. Doctor, Harper closed the door behind us and folded her hands as if to keep them from giving anything away. The donor has arrived, she said. His workup is underway. His markers are a rare 10 out of 10. That is the best possible scenario for Lila. If the rest of his labs clear, we will schedule harvest within 48 hours. Your daughter's conditioning would begin at once. The words should have been oxygen. They were. I breathed them and then felt them thin in my chest. Because mercy rarely travels alone. There is another matter, she continued, choosing the syllables as if each carried weight. The degree of match suggests a close familial relationship. That is unusual, though not impossible, in the registry. The donor has requested to speak with you privately. He understands that it breaks standard protocol. I would not ask if I did not believe the circumstances and the urgency might warrant an exception. Who is he? My voice sounded steady and far away, like someone reading a report in a language they learned to survive. I cannot disclose his identity, she said. But I can tell you he has already consented for harvest regardless of conversation. This is not a condition, it is a request. Then why meet at all? My throat tightened around familiar dread. It wore cedar and a dark suit and patience like a weapon. Because sometimes information shared off the record changes how we plan, she said, and because some people prefer to face the storm rather than let it find them. I looked through the narrow window into the exam room, where Lila swung her legs and drew a purple circle on a scrap of paper, her mouth slightly open in concentration. I could have said no. I could have lived inside the thin protection of rules for one more hour. But rules have never been the walls that keep us safe. The worst things arrive with key cards and smiles. Where? I asked. My office, Dr. Harper said. At the end of the hall, I will have Lila taken for imaging. She will not be alone for a single minute. If you wish me present, I will be present. No, I said. This is mine. She nodded once, as if this were the answer she expected and perhaps feared. She pressed her hand briefly to my forearm in a gesture so small I almost missed it, the kind of human touch that remembers the body as a country before it is a case. Then she returned to Lila with a brightness in her voice and left me standing in the corridor with the old familiar sense that fate had a sense of timing it enjoyed too much. Dr. Harper's office contained 2 chairs, a desk, and a window overlooking a pocket garden arranged to look effortless. The air conditioner hummed in the vent like quiet teeth. I closed the door behind me and placed my palms on the back of the visitor's chair to stop them from shaking. I counted to 10 because that used to work when I was 22 and afraid of exams and not men. At 7, the door opened. He did not enter so much as alter the room. Ethan Blake stepped inside and the office contracted to fit him the way a suit is cut for a shoulder it already knows. He wore pale hospital scrubs that looked like a joke on his body, as if the building had tried to dress him down and failed. The sleeves were pushed to his forearms. The tattoo around his right wrist caught the light, like a line drawn to keep something in or out. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. The past stood between us, with the calm of someone who knows it will be obeyed. Elizabeth, he said before catching himself. The name corrected itself in his mouth like a ship finding its channel. Catherine. Ava, I said, because the day for lies had ended the moment the phone rang in my bookstore. The corner of his mouth lifted, not amusement, not victory, a notation. Ava, he repeated, and my name did something treacherous inside me, as if it were being returned by a voice that remembered the exact weight of each letter. He moved away from the door, each step measured. He did not attempt to touch me. He did not look at my mouth. He looked at my eyes the way a man looks for stars after his compass breaks. How did you find us? I asked, and heard in my own voice the foolish hope that we had been hidden by luck, more powerful than blood. I did not, he said. Your daughter's blood found me. I wanted to deny him. I wanted to throw the word coincidence at him and watch it shatter harmlessly on the floor. But coincidence is a small god that no longer serves me. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and the cedar he wore always, soft and indefatigable. I forced myself to hold his gaze until the fear adjusted to it. You should have told me, he said quietly. 5 years ago. So you could do what? I asked. Add my life to your collection. Put your name on my child like a deed. His jaw tightened. So I could protect what was mine. She is not a possession, I said. Neither am I. Okay. No, he answered, and there was no impatience in his voice, only a gravity that scared me more than anger. You are both obligations I would choose 1,000 times. I did not choose you, I said. I chose to run. You chose to run because you were afraid, he said, as if we were diagnosing an old injury that still limped. Not of me, of what you felt when you were with me. Do not flatter yourself, I said, because better sins than honesty have saved lives. He watched me with that terrible patience, the way a hunter watches a clearing where he knows the deer will eventually step. Whatever you believe about me, he said, I am here for one reason. Your daughter needs my marrow. She will have it. After that, you and I can go to war in rooms where no one bleeds but us. A sound escaped me that might have been a laugh if it had not been broken. You speak like a king in a story, I said, the kind with crowns and knives. I speak like a man who has already signed the consent, he said, and the words steadied the room the way a hand steadies a cup. I moved past him to the window because the garden was easier to look at than his face. The chrysanthemums were planted in circles. The wind made them nod as if agreeing with a logic too old for language. I could have told him about mornings bent over Lila's bed with a thermometer and a prayer, about the way a child's skin grows cool after a transfusion and then warms again, the slow miracle of red returning to pale lips. I could have told him about rent and inventory and illness and the strength required to carry fear the way other women carry handbags. Instead, I said, with all the bluntness I could gather, do not come near her. He let the sentence live in the air a moment before answering. I have already seen her, he said. Through the glass, she has your mouth when she concentrates. She has my mother's hair. I spun before I could stop myself. You looked at her without me. I did, he said, because I wanted to know the first truth before I heard the second one twisted by pain. She is mine. She is mine, I said, and the old animal rose in my throat, the one that bares its teeth even to the hand that feeds. She is ours, he corrected softly, and the pronoun landed like something I had been avoiding and could no longer step around. I gripped the back of the chair until my fingers ached. You are not taking her. I am not taking her anywhere, he said. I am standing in a hospital with a consent form because I intend to give her back the blood her body refuses. You may keep the geography. I will take the responsibility. Eared. You want custody, I said, because fear prefers to write the ending quickly to save time. I want to be her father, he said. There is a distinction. And if I say no? You can say anything you like, he said. Truth does not require your permission. I turned away from him again because some words are easier to hear when you are looking at something that does not care. A nurse pushed a cart down the corridor. On the garden path below, a maintenance worker in a blue jacket bent to pick a fallen leaf and threw it away out of principle. The world continued as if we were not redrawing its map. You bought me, I said, because cruelty is sometimes the only way to feel the edges of a memory. 5 years ago, at a club built like a prayer for people who worship power, you bought my sister's debt and called it salvation. He did not flinch. Your sister came to me because your ex-husband had tied your name to money he did not own and men who do not forgive, he said. She believed, correctly, that you would walk into a room with him and demand the truth and die for it. She asked me to keep the Vasquez men out of Chicago. I did. It cost her more than it cost you. It cost me most of all. It is the Delgado Syndicate, I said in reflex, correcting the old name that still haunted my sleep. Not Vasquez. It's not many. His mouth tilted the smallest degree. Names change, he said. Math does not. Anger fought with understanding, and, to my disgust, with a flash of gratitude so quick I could pretend I had imagined it, I closed my eyes. Behind my eyelids there was always the same image. A door closing behind me in the night, my breath loud, my hand on my belly, the elevator descending as if I could go far enough down to escape being seen. A knock tapped at the frame. Doctor. Harper stood in the doorway, composed but not untouched by the current in the room. They are ready to take Lila for imaging, she said. We will be 20 minutes, perhaps a little more. I will be there in a moment, I said. She glanced between us. She was a woman who could read a room and choose which chart to note. Take your time, she said, and left us with the option of mercy. I reached for the door, but Ethan's voice stopped me. Ava. It was the first time he had said my name, the way a man says a word that is not a command or a confession but a request. What? I asked without turning. I am going through with the donation, he said, no matter what you decide after, but understand me, I do not intend to remain a stranger to my daughter. I did not trust my voice. I stood with my hand on the knob and counted to 5 and could not make it to 6. When I found the words, they were not the ones I had practiced in every nightmare where he found me at last. Her name is Lila, I said. She is 5 and will be 6 in January. She likes purple dragons, chocolate ice cream after needles, and stories where the princess learns to save herself because the night keeps getting lost. She sleeps with a stuffed rabbit named Moon. She is the best thing I have ever done. There was a pause that contained a lifetime. When he spoke, his voice was roughened a fraction, as if it had remembered how to be human without his permission. I will learn her favorites, he said, the ones you have not named yet. I opened the door because any longer, and I would have said something I could not take back. The corridor met me with its sterile breath. At the end of the hall, a nurse lifted her hand in the universal sign for, "Come, it is time." I walked toward my daughter and left a man in an office with a garden view and a consent form that might save a life and ruin a future in equal measure. Lila looked up as they rolled her bed toward imaging. "Where did you go, Mommy?" "I was talking to the man who is going to help make you better," I said, and the truth had the strange sweetness of fruit eaten out of season. "Is he nice?" she asked. Because niceness is the first virtue children learn before the world teaches them others. "He is careful," I said. "He keeps his promises." She considered this and nodded as if I had given her a fact she could use later in algebra. "Can he come after? For ice cream?" I felt the floor shift under my feet and held her hand tighter. "We will see," I said. "First the dragon bite, then the story." They pushed her toward the double doors where rooms are kept quiet for machines that hum with the arrogance of saving lives. I kissed her forehead, the soft space above her eyes, and tasted the future there like rain. When I turned, Ethan stood at the end of the hall. He had not moved closer. He had not left. He existed like a constant, like gravity, like a law. We looked at each other across 20 yards of neutral flooring, the distance humming with things that would not be decided today. He inclined his head the smallest degree, a gesture that might have been respect or acknowledgement or a vow. Then he stepped back through a different door, into a corridor that led toward operating rooms and signed promises and pain willingly collected as a tithe. I followed my daughter into the light that did not lie, and for once I did not run. Hospitals at night are not silent. They hum, they click, they breathe in fluorescent cycles. Machines mutter in corners. Nurses speak in a language of abbreviations and glances. In the small private room that had been transformed into a fortress for Lila, I sat in a recliner with a storybook open on my lap, my eyes moving across the same paragraph without seeing it. The IV pump ticked like a small metronome. Lila's breaths rose and fell under the blanket printed with purple dragons. Her small hand curled around the stuffed rabbit she had named Moon, the ear worn thin from years of clinging. We had been there for 3 days. 3 days of blood draws, conditioning medication, vital checks, whispered consultations in hallways, 3 days of watching the quiet miracle of preparation for something that might save her. And 3 days of Ethan Blake's presence unignorable, patient, a shadow turned flesh. He did not hover, he did not intrude, but the hospital seemed to bend around him. Rooms opened, specialists appeared, security doubled, and then doubled again without ever announcing itself. When he moved through the corridor, staff looked up as if the air pressure had changed. Even Dr. Emily Harper, whose voice never cracked, took an infinitesimal breath before she spoke to him. I had not allowed him into Lila's room. He had not tried to enter. He stood at the threshold sometimes, hands behind his back, as if measuring a distance he did not yet have the right to cross. Once or twice I caught him watching through the observation window, his expression unreadable, as though trying to memorize a child he had never met. Lila, who missed nothing, noticed him on the third evening. "Mommy," she whispered as I tucked the blanket tighter around her. "Who is that man out there?" I kept my voice light. "He's someone who is helping us." She tilted her head. "He looks at me the way Lily's daddy looks at her. Her best friend at kindergarten. The girl with the curly hair and the father who picked her up every day, carrying her like a treasure." "What makes you think that?" I asked. "He has the same eyes as me," she said simply. I froze. She watched me with the solemn patience of children who have learned that adults lie. "Sweetheart," I began, and then stopped. How do you explain to a 5-year-old the tangled map of choices and fears and bloodlines? How do you tell her that the man who stands outside her door is not a stranger, but the axis on which her life quietly turned? "Yes," I said at last, because the truth had waited long enough. "He is your daddy." She blinked, taking the words in like medicine. "Does he not like me? Is that why he never came before?" "Oh, baby," I gathered her against me carefully, mindful of the IV line. "No, he didn't know about you. It was complicated, grown-up stuff, but he's here now because he wants to help make you better." She studied my face, looking for cracks. Will he stay after I'm better? The question landed like a stone in a still pond. I smoothed her hair back. "I don't know," I said. "That's something we'll have to figure out together." She nodded, a small sage, and turned her attention back to her coloring book as if she had filed the conversation away for later. That night, after she drifted into a medicated sleep, I stepped into the small family lounge adjacent to her room. Ethan was waiting there, his jacket off, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. Without the armor of a suit, he looked less like an institution and more like a man, though the quiet authority clung to him even in hospital scrubs. A tablet lay on the table in front of him, graphs and charts glowing faintly. "She knows," I said without preamble. He looked up slowly. "Knows what?" "That you're her father. She figured it out on her own." Something flickered across his face, pride maybe, or an ache he didn't let travel to his mouth. "She's perceptive," he said, "like her mother. She wants to know if you're staying after the transplant." He set the tablet aside and leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees. The intensity of his gaze hadn't diminished over the years. If anything, it had condensed. "What do you want me to tell her?" "The truth would be nice," I said, a small edge creeping into my voice. "But I'm not sure either of us knows what that is anymore." He exhaled, slow, deliberate. "Here's my truth. I have a daughter I didn't know existed until 3 days ago. A daughter who needs me, not just my bone marrow, but me. I have no intention of disappearing from her life again, voluntary or not." The implied accusation hung between us like a drawn curtain. I sank into the chair opposite him, exhaustion catching up to me. "And here's mine. I've spent 5 years building a life where my daughter is safe, a normal life with friends and school and birthday parties. Not a life where she's watched by guards or wonders if her father will come home bloodied or not at all." His jaw tightened. "Is that what you think her life would have been?" "Tell me I'm wrong," I said. Instead of answering, he stood and moved to the window overlooking the hospital garden. The glass reflected his face in fractured light. "Things have changed in 5 years." "Have they?" I challenged. "Or have you just gotten better at hiding them?" He turned, the ambient glow catching the angles of his face. "I won't apologize for who I am or what I've built, but I will say this. Everything I've done has been to secure a future, a legacy. I never knew what for until now." Allers Ebel. Something in his tone made my heart stumble. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression hardening instantly. "We have a problem," he said, "all business now. My security team has detected unusual surveillance patterns around the hospital. Someone's watching, and they're not my people." Cold dread spread through me. "You think it's them, the Delgado Syndicate?" "It's a possibility we can't ignore." He was already moving toward the door. "I'm doubling security on this floor. No one enters without my personal approval." I caught his sleeve. "If anything happens to her..." He paused, turning back to me. For a brief moment, the mask of control slipped, revealing something raw and fierce beneath. "Nothing will happen to her or to you," he said. "Not while I breathe." He left, and the door closed softly behind him. I returned to Lila's room and sat beside her bed, watching her small chest rise and fall, her lashes casting shadows on cheeks too pale. The monitor ticked off her heartbeat, steady and stubborn. I reached for her hand and held it, the weight of Ethan's words echoing in my head. He was a man who had built a world out of control and silence, and yet here, in this sterile room, I had seen something else, a fracture, a vow, a man ready to bleed, not just in a surgical theater, but in the slow work of becoming known. Lila stirred in her sleep and murmured something I couldn't catch. I bent close, smoothing her hair. "I'm here," I whispered. "I'm here." Through the small window in the door, I saw Ethan return, flanked by two men in plain clothes who moved like shadows. He spoke to them briefly, then looked in at us. His gaze found mine across the distance. For a moment, the hospital fell away, and there were only the three of us, bound by blood, by choices, by the narrow edge between danger and love. Then the moment passed. The hallway filled again with movement. The machines kept time. I held my daughter's hand and listened to her breathe, knowing that everything was about to change again, and that this time I might not be able to run. The night fractured into alerts, not loud ones, not the theatrical sirens of movies, but the quiet, conscientious alarms of a place that refuses to panic because panic is contagious. A soft tone at the nurse's station. A text that turned the screen of my borrowed phone into a cold square of light. A subtle tightening in the way the staff moved, like a school of fish sensing a predator's shadow long before the water darkened. Ethan came to the threshold with the gravity of a storm arriving. He did not enter Lila's room. He stood where he always stood, just beyond the line, as if he were teaching me that he could hold a boundary without flinching. Nick appeared at his shoulder, and behind them, two men who had learned how to look like nothing at all, which is to say, everything a certain kind of danger respects. Dr. Harper slipped in from the opposite side, the careful calm of her face made stranger by the way her hands had already found each other. "What is it?" I asked, though the answer had been whispered into the corners of the hospital since sunset. "Surveillance has increased," Ethan said. "The same vehicle has circled the block 3 times in the last hour." A man with a camera waited on the pedestrian bridge and took pictures through the glass until security approached. He left quickly, but not as if he had been frightened, as if he had completed a task. "The Delgado Syndicate," I said. The name felt like the taste of a coin between my teeth. "Most likely," Nick said. "They do not usually show their hands this politely. That bothers me." "Polite?" I echoed. "They are saying, 'We see you,'" Ethan said, "which is only worth saying if what follows is worse." Dr. Harper stepped closer to Lila's bed, as if her presence could cast a stronger light. "I will not have this floor turned into a theater," she said. "If your people need to be here, they will follow hospital protocols. They will identify themselves to my head nurse. They will keep the noise of their work in the hall, and they will not frighten my patients." Ethan inclined his head, a movement so slight it could have been a thought passing. "They will obey," he said. He glanced toward Lila, softened by the tubes and quiet machines. "How long until conditioning is complete?" "We began the final sequence at 2200, she said. "She is on day -1. The harvest is scheduled for 7. If his labs hold and hers do, transplant by evening. After that, the window for infection and graft failure is open. We close it as best we can, but it stays open for a while. She cannot be moved, I said. Hearing the steel in my voice and praying, it was enough to hold the world in place. Dr. Harper did not sugar the answer. Medically, moving her now is not advisable, she said. Practically, moving her now would be dangerous, regardless of medicine. The safest place for her is in this bed with my people and your people pretending to get along. Ethan's gaze met mine. Behind the control, there was a heat I recognized and did not dare name. Then, this is where we fight, he said, as if we were discussing weather and not war. I sat on the edge of the recliner and smoothed the corner of Lila's blanket, an old gesture from an older life. What do they want? I asked, though that question had 100 answers. Money, leverage, history, me. They want all of it, Ethan said. They want an old debt paid with present fear. They want to remind me that even men who know the city cannot lock every door at once. They want to remind you what kind of world Ryan tried to borrow from and failed to return. The old name was a stone landing in the pool we were still trying to cross. He is gone, I said softly, and yet we are still paying. That is how bad math works, Ethan said. You keep paying until someone smarter fixes the equation. He turned to Nick. Lock down the elevators. I want a man at each car who looks like someone's father and feels like someone's knife. Reroute non-essential traffic. If anyone asks, it is a systems test. It is not a lie. The system is being tested. Yes, Nick said, already in motion. Park the decoys? 2 at the drop-off. 2 on the service road. 1 at the east lot. We make it hard to know which door is the real one. Doctor. Harper's phone vibrated. She glanced red and her shoulders eased a fraction. Infectious disease cleared his labs, she said. We are a go for harvest. I will be in the operating room at 7. How long will he be under? I asked, surprising myself with the pronoun I chose. 2 hours for the procedure, assuming the iliac crest yields easily, she said. A few more for recovery. He will be sore, he will live. Your daughter will have a better chance. Ethan watched me as she spoke. When she finished, he said very quietly, I will be where you can find me when she wakes. I did not ask you to be, I said, because habit dies the way old forests do with echoes. You did not have to, he replied. The next hour was made of logistics and tenderness. Nurses with voices like warm blankets took vitals and charted them with the penmanship of people who believe in order. A respiratory therapist checked the settings, humming under her breath as if breath liked to be sung to. Ethan's men took positions along the corridor, their presence meant to be felt more than seen. They asked for nothing. They moved as if they had practiced this dance 1,000 nights in 1,000 buildings that wanted to pretend they were exempt from the dark. At midnight, the hospital folded into the kind of hush that only places with urgent work can achieve. Dr. Harper returned with a consent form printed on thick paper that made the signatures sound important when the pen moved across it. I signed again where I had signed 12 times. Ethan signed his own set with the economy of someone who knows how much his name weighs and when to spend it. Then he left for preoperative preparation with a nod at me that contained nothing performative, only fact. Alone with Lila, I read to her from a book about a girl who mapped the night sky with a crayon and a stubborn heart. She dozed and woke and dozed again, the medication pulling her gently under and letting her surface in breaths. At 2 a.m, a nurse brought me coffee that tasted like intention more than flavor. At 3, Nick stepped into the doorway and said, changes, and the word pulled all the oxygen from the hall. What kind? I asked, standing. The coffee forgotten and cooling into a small bitter truth. 2 men at the east entrance, Nick said. Not ours. They watched each other instead of the door. That means they are not friends. A third walked past the emergency department twice without going in. He carried nothing. That means his hands are for something else. What does it mean? I asked, because fear requires grammar. It means they are arguing about who gets the prize, Ethan said, appearing at Nick's shoulder in a surgical gown that did not diminish him. His hair was covered, his mouth half hidden, by a mask he had not yet lifted. Only his eyes were his, steady and dark. "Am I the prize?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. "You are the leverage," he said. "She is the prize, but they do not know how to hold a prize without breaking it." I put my palm on Lila's ankle through the blanket, a small anchor to a small ship. "What do? We stop being interesting," he said. "We stop being where they expect us to be." Dr. Harper slipped in as if she had been there all along, listening, calculating. "We cannot move her," she said, "but we can move the idea of her." Ethan's eyes found hers with approval. "Yes." Plans condensed. A transport gurney identical to Lila's arrived from a different floor. A second set of blankets. A second stuffed animal borrowed from the pediatric playroom. A nurse whose build matched mine from a distance tied her hair in a braid and took my coat. At 3:30, while the hospital slept the sleep of people who must wake to fight, the decoy gurney left the room with care, a small procession of tenderness wrapped in theater. 2 of Ethan's men flanked it. They turned left at the junction where the signs pointed right. They headed toward imaging, then doubled back beneath a different clock. If anyone followed, they would be following a story, not a child. I stood in the dim light by the window and watched the garden pretend to be a place untouched by negotiation. I could see our reflection faintly in the glass, the band of purple dragons across the blanket, the gold of my hair tangled by a night that did not end, the white of the machines that counted, and counted as if the counting itself was prayer. Lila stirred. I leaned close. "Do you want to hear the next part?" I whispered. She nodded without opening her eyes. I read, and the words made a small shelter. Inside it, I heard the world turning on decisions made in other rooms. The east entrance went quiet. The emergency department saw no one unusual for 7 minutes and then 2 at once. The pedestrian bridge emptied because a janitor with an old soul swept it in long, patient strokes until only clean glass and the idea of dawn remained. Somewhere below us, an elevator paused between floors because the system wanted to think. At 5, Ethan returned, the gown exchanged for scrubs, with his name printed in absurd letters on a sticker he had not bothered to remove. He looked as if he had not slept, because he had not, but some men wear exhaustion as if it is punctuation. He nodded toward the window, where the black was loosening into gray. "Nick thinks they have pushed as far as they can without choosing a door," he said. "He believes they will wait for us to make the first mistake. We will not." "What is our first mistake?" I asked. Half a challenge, half a plea. "Confusing gentleness for weakness," he said. "Doctor." Harper appeared for the 1,000th time, and for the first word of the day that felt like a beginning. "It is time," she said. "There are phrases that reorganize the body. Time is one of them." The room became a series of tasks executed with ceremony. The nurse checked Lila's identity band again and again and asked her name to a child who murmured it into the morning as if it were a spell. I kissed her forehead, then the soft place at her temple, the way I had the day she was born, when the world was still deciding whether to keep her. She looked up at me through heavy lashes. "Mommy," she said, "is the careful man coming back?" "Yes," I said, hearing the faith in my own voice and deciding to let it stand. "He is coming back with the part your body needs." "Will it hurt him?" she asked. "A little," I said, "but he says he would do it 1,000 times. And she thought about this, then nodded with the grave generosity of children. "Okay," she said. "He can have my chocolate ice cream after. I will share." The gurney moved. Time narrowed to the small circle of our steps as we followed her into the corridor. The decoy team crossed at the far junction again, feeding the story. Ethan walked beside me, but not touching, as if he knew that contact would turn me into a thing that might break. At the double doors, Doctor, Harper stopped, her hand on the bar, her eyes on mine. "We go from here," she said. "We will take her through, and you will wait, and then we will bring her back to you. I do not make promises I cannot keep. I promise only that we will do the work." "Do it," I said. Because language cannot help you past a certain point. Work can. They took her. The doors whispered closed, carrying my heart like contraband. Ethan and I stood in the rectangle of absence they left behind. The corridor breathed. Somewhere a coffee machine hissed as if mimicking human fatigue. I put my hand against the cool metal of the door and kept it there until the heat of my palm convinced me the barrier was thinner than it felt. Nick appeared at the far end, his gait telling us before his mouth did that something had changed. The two at the east entrance are gone, he said. No movement on the bridge. A silver sedan idled at the south lot and then left when it saw nothing to salivate over. Upness. They will be back, Ethan said, and we will still be here. He turned to me then, and for the first time since this began, he reached out, not to take, not to lead. He took my hand the way a man ties a rope between two people in a storm so they do not lose each other in the water. His hand was warm. It made me angry that warmth could still be a surprise. This is the part where we wait, he said. I am not good at waiting, but I will do it with you. S's? I nodded because I could not trust my mouth. We sat in the small family lounge where the chairs were designed to pretend at comfort. We did not speak for a long time. It was not silence. It was an agreement to breathe together in a room that insisted on air. The sun found the corner of the window and pressed a pale square of light onto the linoleum. The world did not end. It did what it always does. It continued as if continuing were not the bravest thing. When the clock on the wall found 8, a nurse came through the door with a face that had learned how to deliver facts without wasting joy. The harvest went well, she said. Dr. Harper is with him in recovery. We have what we need for your daughter. I closed my eyes because that was the only way to hold the weight of relief without dropping it. When I opened them, Ethan was looking at me with an expression that did not fit any of the categories I had yet allowed him. He did not smile. He did not reach for me again. He only nodded once, as if we had completed the first impossible thing and were now required to do the second. Then we go back to work, he said. I stood. The corridor welcomed us like a field after a storm. The door to the unit opened, and the room that had learned the shape of our fear took us back. The threat had not vanished. It waited where all threats wait when you refuse to give them theater. But for 1 hour, the math had been corrected. For 1 hour, the story was ours to tell, and in that hour, I believed, incredibly and without permission, that we might keep it. The hospital never really sleeps, but there is a lull just before dawn when its walls seem to breathe with you. It was in that gray hour, the one between exhaustion and hope, that the decision was made. Dr. Harper's team had finished the harvest. Ethan was resting 2 floors below, pale but steady, his blood waiting in the chilled steel that would carry it into Lila's body. The decoys had confused whoever was watching. For the first time in days, the corridor outside our room felt empty of intent. That was the hour Ethan chose to move us. Nick came first, his presence as quiet as a pulse. It's time, he said simply, before they regroup. She can't be moved, I whispered, glancing at Lila. She can, Doctor, Harper said from the doorway, her voice calm but tight. We'll do it as a rolling ICU. She'll be safer in motion than waiting here for them to guess right. She had already arranged it an ambulance-level transport, monitors, IV pumps, and a pediatric critical care nurse who looked like she could command an army. I stared at them both. Where? Blake Manor, Nick said. Private facility. Full medical wing. Security we control. The words landed like a verdict. Blake Manor. The name I had heard whispered once or twice from Tessa's lips, a place I had pictured but never seen, Ethan's fortress outside Chicago. I wanted to protest, to refuse, but the world outside this room had already been chosen for us by men with cameras and patience. When? I asked. Now, Nick said. We moved like a drill. The nurse disconnected the monitors one at a time, reattaching portable leads with the calm precision of a soldier dismantling a bomb. Dr. Harper double-checked the IVs, Lila slept through it all, her small face turned toward the stuffed rabbit she refused to release even under sedation. I packed a bag with my hands on autopilot. Her sweater, the book of dragons, a change of clothes. I hesitated over the framed photo from the bedside table. Lila on the playground, her hair flying but left it. A photo was a breadcrumb. The hallway beyond the door was strangely bright. Ethan waited there, standing straight despite the stiffness in his movements, the pale green hospital scrubs replaced by dark clothes again. His eyes found Lila first, then me. "She'll be safe," he said. "Will she?" I asked. "Yes," he said, "and you will be with her." Nick took the lead. Two of Ethan's men followed at a distance that looked casual but wasn't. They had chosen the back service corridor, a route that bypassed the main elevators. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and early morning. I walked beside the gurney, my fingers laced with Lila's tiny hand. Ethan walked just behind me. I could feel him there without turning, steady, silent, a gravity I had once fought and now used to balance myself. The service elevator waited at the far end. Its mirrored walls reflected our small procession back at us, distorted by the brushed steel. The doors slid closed, sealing us into a box of soft machinery. Nick hit a code. We descended. The weight of the hospital lifted from my chest as if we were sinking out of its orbit. On the basement level, the air was cooler, tasting of concrete and diesel. A private ambulance waited in the loading bay, its lights off, a sleek black vehicle that looked more like a discreet limousine with medical credentials. Inside, the equipment was state-of-the-art, compact but complete. The pediatric nurse climbed in first, checking her watch. I helped settle Lila onto the stretcher, tucking the rabbit beside her. Ethan stood aside, letting me do it, his hands at his sides but his eyes on every movement. "You'll ride with her," Nick said to me. "I'll take point in the lead car. Mr. Blake rides with you. 2 follow vehicles behind." I looked at Ethan. "You just had a procedure." "I'm fine," he said. "She knows me now." He climbed in opposite me, bracing his arm against the wall as the doors closed. For a moment, the ambulance was only the sound of the engine and the steady beep of Lila's monitor. Then we began to move. Boston at dawn was a watercolor of steam and neon. The streets were nearly empty, the sidewalks glossed with last night's rain. The convoy slid through traffic lights as if the city had been told to hold them green. Nick's voice crackled over a hidden channel. "All clear." "Please." I sat with my palm on Lila's ankle under the blanket, feeling the faint heat of her skin, the rhythm of her life. Across from me, Ethan sat very still, his long fingers resting on his knee. The bandage at his hip peeked out from beneath his shirt. He did not wince. "She looks like you," he said quietly. "She looks like herself," I replied. His mouth curved slightly. "True." We rode in silence for a while, the city giving way to the highway. Trees blurred by, wet and dark, their leaves gone to copper. The nurse adjusted a drip with hands that made no sound. Ethan spoke again without looking at me. "Tessa has been working for me since the night you left." I stiffened. "What?" "She came to me after you ran. Said she would stay close enough to protect you, but far enough that you wouldn't see her shadow. She fed me information when she could. She made sure you had a clean ID, a safe landlord, a school for Lila that wouldn't ask questions. She kept them off you." The words cut and soothed in equal measure. Betrayal, salvation, 2 sides of the same coin. "She lied to me," I said softly. "She saved you," he said. "Both can be true." I looked at him then. Really looked. The man across from me was not the one who had first taken me into his penthouse like a captured bird. He was paler, maybe thinner, his hair touched by something darker than age. But the patience was still there, and the control. Only now there was a fracture at its center where a child had stepped through. "I don't know if I can forgive her," I said. "That's between sisters," he said. "I only tell you because you should know what she risked." The convoy left the highway for a narrow road lined with trees. Dawn had broken fully now, the sky a muted silver. We passed a low stone wall and a wrought iron gate that opened at our approach without visible guards. Beyond it, a long drive curved through fields that looked as if they had been lifted from another century. Blake Manor appeared at the crest of a hill, a house built to outlast storms. Brick and slate, wide windows, a lake at its back catching the early light. It did not look like a fortress, but I could feel its defenses the way you feel the hum of electricity in a fence. The ambulance slowed. I reached for Lila's hand. She stirred, blinking up at me, with eyes clouded by medication but still curious. "Where are we, Mommy?" she murmured. "A place where you'll get better," I said. The doors opened. The air smelled of pine and water. A team in discreet uniforms waited, not with clipboards, but with readiness. The nurse transferred Lila onto a rolling bed and began attaching her to monitors already waiting inside the private medical suite. The transition was seamless, rehearsed. I followed, stunned by the room's quiet sophistication, soft walls, filtered air, machines humming at a lower pitch than in the hospital. This was not a sick room, but a sanctuary disguised as one. Ethan stopped at the door. "Everything she needs is here," he said. "Specialists on call. Security you won't see. You can stay in the suite next door. She will never be out of your reach." I turned to him, the question rising before I could swallow it. "Why?" He met my eyes. No deflection this time. "Because she is my daughter. Because you are the mother of my daughter. Because I spent 5 years building a world without knowing who it was for." I felt the floor tilt, but not from fear, from the weight of too many truths aligning. "And after," I asked, "when she's better?" His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed low. "After, we decide what future we give her. Together or apart. But she will have one. That is non-negotiable." "Yeah." I looked at him for a long moment, then at Lila, already drifting into another nap, her small chest rising and falling under the dragon blanket. The lake shimmered beyond the window. For the first time since leaving Boston, I felt the edge of my panic soften. Not vanish, but curl back like a wave. "You've built a fortress," I said quietly, "but she's not a treasure to lock away." "I know," he said. "I built this for you. Not to keep you in, but to keep the world out. And it'd see." I almost asked when he had begun, how long he had been preparing for a child he did not know existed. But Lila sighed in her sleep, and the question dissolved. Nick appeared at the doorway. "Perimeter is secure," he said. The convoy split after the gate. 2 cars continued east, nothing on the approach. Ethan nodded. "Rotate the watch every 2 hours. No one assumes this is over." Nick left. The room settled. Ethan stepped closer to the bed, not touching, just looking. Lila stirred again, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at him with the solemn curiosity of a child waking into a new story. "Are you my daddy?" she asked. The question was a blade wrapped in lace. Ethan went very still. "Yes," he said. "Mommy says you're careful," she murmured. "I try to be," he said, his voice low. "Will you stay?" His eyes closed for a fraction of a breath. When he opened them, they were steadier than I had ever seen. "As long as you want me to," he said. She seemed to consider this. "Okay," she said, and drifted back into sleep. I sat down slowly, my knees unsteady. Ethan remained where he was, hands at his sides, a man who had built a life out of power, now learning the weight of a small child's trust. The monitors beeped softly. The lake caught the rising Sunday. Somewhere beyond the walls, danger waited, patient and disappointed. Inside the room, for one heartbeat, there was only us. The first morning at Blake Manor dawned as if the world had been washed clean. Pale light spilled over the lake, and the surface rippled with soft gold. From Lila's room, I could see the water stretching toward the forest, a mirror pretending to be calm. The air smelled of pine and the faint tang of rain. For a moment, I let myself believe it could be peace. Lila was still asleep, her arm wrapped around the stuffed rabbit, the IV line winding gently down from the pole like a single fragile thread holding her to the world. Her cheeks had more color. The monitors whispered their mechanical lullabies. The nurse on duty smiled when she saw me stir. "She's responding well," she said. "The counts are climbing already." Relief hit me like dizziness. I murmured a thank you and slipped quietly into the adjoining room. The suite that Ethan had given me was larger than my entire apartment in Boston. It was beautiful in that deliberate, expensive way that meant someone had thought of every comfort except how to make it feel lived in. I showered, dressed, and found coffee waiting in a silver carafe on the table. When I poured it, a note fluttered out from beneath the tray, handwritten in the same controlled script that had once adorned contracts and threat letters. "The harvest was successful. She will stabilize within 48 hours. There's something you should see before the day begins. E." Below the message was a location, the conservatory. I didn't want to see him. Not yet. But curiosity has always been the first and cruelest weakness of women like me. The corridor outside my suite was silent except for the faint murmur of voices somewhere deeper in the house. When I reached the conservatory, a glass chamber jutting out toward the lake, I found him waiting. Ethan stood with his back to the water, his hands in the pockets of a charcoal gray sweater, sleeves pushed to his elbows. The light caught the edge of his profile and turned it into sculpture. On the table beside him was a small laptop, its screen dark. "You're up early," I said, stopping at the threshold. "I never sleep well after giving parts of myself away," he said, not looking at me. I folded my arms. "I thought you didn't believe in ghosts." "I don't," he said, "but they believe in me." I wanted to ask what he meant, but the answer was already in the way. His shoulders tightened. "You said there's something I should see." He gestured toward the laptop. "Your sister." The words froze me in place. "Tessa? She called while you were sleeping." "Called you?" I asked. The disbelief sharpened my throat. He nodded once. "She's been following the movement of the Delgado men since we left Boston. They've scattered for now, but their second tier, the ones who do not like to lose, are regrouping." Tessa intercepted a message meant for a contact in New York. It mentioned you and a delivery. "What kind of delivery?" "The kind that doesn't survive the trip," he said. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "And she's still in Boston?" "For now." He finally turned to look at me. "She wants to come here." I told her to wait until I could verify the roads and the air routes. But she insisted you needed to hear from her directly, so I arranged a call. He tapped the keyboard, and the screen brightened. Tessa's face appeared, grainy but unmistakably hers. She looked thinner, her hair pulled back, her eyes tired and alive. "Ava?" "Tessa," the name came out like a confession. "Where are you?" "In a safe house near the harbor," she said. "At least for the moment. Ethan's people are watching the routes, but they're clever, the Delgados. They have someone inside the Port Authority. You shouldn't be there." "I know," she said simply. "But I couldn't leave without making sure they didn't find anything. I cleaned your old apartment myself. Every trace is gone. Your name, your store, even the mail trail. You don't exist there anymore." I pressed my lips together, trying to contain the mixture of gratitude and anger. "You should have told me everything from the beginning, Tess. About Ryan, about Ethan, about the money." Her eyes softened and her smile trembled. "If I had told you, you would have gone straight to him, either Ryan or Ethan, and both would have destroyed you, just in different ways. I thought I could fix it before it touched you." "And did you?" She hesitated. "I tried." Behind her voice was the sound of waves against metal. She was near the docks, maybe in one of the warehouses she used to photograph for side work. "Tessa," Ethan said quietly, leaning toward the camera, "you need to leave that location. We can get you out within the hour." She shook her head. "Not yet. I found something. It's about Ryan and about you." Ethan's posture changed, subtle but immediate. "Go on." Tessa's voice lowered. "Before he died, Ryan was moving more than money. He was moving information, account details, shipment manifests. Some of it belonged to Delgado, but some belonged to you. He was trying to sell both sides against the middle. That's why they killed him. And that's why they might come for you next. I know what he took, Ethan said. I cleaned it after he vanished. No, she said. You cleaned what you could find. But there's one more file. It's encrypted and it's still in play. Delgado's people think Ava has it because it was registered under her name. My stomach dropped. Me? You, or what's left of your digital shadow, she said. I found the reference in a dead account. They didn't close properly. I'm sending the data packet now. Ethan will know what to do. Send it and leave, Ethan said, every word edged with command. Tessa's smile flickered again, the same crooked curve from our childhood. You always think you can fix everything, Ethan. Maybe that's why she ran. He didn't answer. The silence between them was heavy and strange, like two magnets held too close together. She turned back to me. Tell Lila I love her, and that her aunt is trying to be brave. Tessa, wait. But the screen went dark before I could finish. The silence that followed felt bottomless. Ethan stared at the laptop, jaw tight. We're moving her, he said. Lila? You, both of you, if possible. If Delgado believes the file exists, Boston was just the beginning. They'll come here next. Where could we possibly go that you don't already control? I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't look up. There's a private airfield behind the northern woods. Underground hangar, short runway. From there, Zurich or Reykjavik. I own both routes. Ethan, I said, stepping closer, this isn't a war. It's our life. Lila just survived the transplant. She can't be moved again. He finally met my eyes, and for a moment I saw not the strategist, but the man beneath it, raw and exhausted. I will not lose you again, he said. Not to them. I opened my mouth to argue, but a soft chime interrupted us, the security system registering motion. Nick's voice came through a small speaker near the window. We've got an inbound car, unauthorized, approaching from the south drive. Ethan was already moving. How far? Half a mile and closing. He grabbed a jacket from the back of a chair. Stay with Lila, he said. Ethan, stay. He was gone before I could stop him. I ran back to Lila's room. The nurse looked up, startled by the tension in my face. What's happening? She asked. Just a security check, I lied. Keep her asleep. Don't open the door for anyone but me. Through the window, I could see Ethan and Nick emerge into the courtyard, the morning fog rising around them. The approaching car appeared at the curve of the drive, dark, sleek, its headlights cutting through the mist. It slowed but didn't stop. The driver's window rolled down just enough for something small to fall onto the gravel. Then the car reversed, turned, and vanished the way it had come. Nick moved first, crouching to inspect the object. Even from here, I saw him flinch. He picked it up with a gloved hand and held it toward Ethan. It was a phone burner model, plain, disposable. A message blinked on the screen. Ethan read it once, then crushed the phone in his hand until the plastic split. When he came back inside, his face was unreadable. What did it say? I asked. Tessa's location, he said. And a warning. What kind of warning? That she has 1 hour, he said. Or they start sending reminders. So, the world narrowed to the space between his words. I'm going after her, he said. You can't, I said. She's bait. That's what they want. I don't care. He turned toward the hall. Already moving. Already calculating. I grabbed his arm. If you leave, what happens to us? He looked at me for a long moment, and something like regret crossed his face. You'll be safe. Nick will stay. I can't let her die for what she tried to fix. Ethan? He pulled free. Gentle, but final. I owe her. You owe her. And then he was gone. Through the glass, I saw the security gates opening, the black sedan disappearing into the trees. The fog swallowed it whole. I pressed my hand against the window, the cold seeping into my skin. Lila slept behind me, unaware of the past tightening its grip again. Dr. Harper's words came back to me from that first night. Sometimes the shortest route to safety is through a door you do not like. I closed my eyes. For 5 years, I had built a life out of silence. Now ghosts were calling us back, and one of them had my sister's voice. Blake Manor did not shout its power. It held it in the bones. The longer I walked its corridors, the more I understood that the house had been designed to keep weather and history at bay, to let whatever lived inside it breathe without asking permission from the world. The lake lay beyond the windows like a great, deliberate silence. Pines stitched the horizon. Somewhere below the east wing, generators whispered to themselves in the language of contingency. In Lila's room, the machines measured her slow return to us, with the patience of a clock that refused to hurry. She slept most of that morning, small and warm beneath the dragon blanket, her lashes casting soft shadows across cheeks already pinking with new blood. The nurse read charts and smiled without wasting words. I sat beside the bed and listened for any change at all, counting the seconds between breaths, refusing to glance at the door every time a shoe scuffed outside. Hours stretched into a thin wire. On the other end of it, Ethan had vanished into fog to fetch my sister from the mouth of a trap. I do not know how long I sat that way. The light shifted from pearl to a clearer gold as the sun finally decided to show its face. Somewhere down the hall, a kettle clicked and sang. On the lake, a bird skated the surface and rose. The house exhaled when the front gates opened again. Nick appeared first in the doorway, his face composed and flushed with cold. He looked at Lila, then at me, and something like relief passed through his features before he folded them back into order. "They are home," he said. I stood so quickly the chair scraped the floor. "Is she alive?" he said, "bruised by the day, angry at fate, demanding tea." A corner of his mouth moved as if he remembered how to smile. "You should meet them in the conservatory." The walk there was shorter than it had been that morning. Fear warps distance. When I stepped into the glass room, the lake seemed nearer than before, the water bright with afternoon. Ethan stood at the far end, his jacket open, his hair damp with fog. Beside him, Tessa sat on a low bench, wrapped in one of the house's soft gray blankets, her knees drawn up, a mug between her hands like a small hearth. For one moment, we only looked at each other. I saw the child who had dragged me through thunderstorms with a flashlight and a dare. I saw the woman who had lied to me with the stubborn love that thinks it can rewrite a story by force of will. She saw the sister who had left her on the far bank of a river and pretended the current had done it. "You are late," she said, and the rasp in her voice turned the words into an apology. "I wanted you to be earlier," I said, and it was as close as I could get to forgiveness without breaking in too. She set the mug down and stood. We met in the middle of the room like two countries both tired of war. When we hugged, it was not tidy. She was shaking harder than I had expected, and the top of her head smelled of rain and diesel and fear. I realized then how small she was inside the blanket of her courage. "I had to see you with my own eyes," she said into my shoulder. "I had to see her room. I had to hear the machines say she is staying." "She is staying," I said, because sometimes speaking the truth out loud helps it keep its shape. We let go of each other at the same moment, arms falling in a gesture that felt practiced from childhood. When I turned, Ethan had stepped back to the window, which meant he had given us what privacy he could and kept the rest for our own good. His knuckles were faintly scraped. A small bruise darkened the bone under his left eye like a fingerprint. He carried his injuries with the indifference of a man who keeps score somewhere no one else can see. "What happened?" I asked, not yet ready to thank him, not willing to pretend I did not know. Tessa answered first. "They left me a picture at the docks," she said. One of those old ways of sending a message. A print pushed under a door. It was our old apartment building, taken from the opposite roof. A note on the back. 1 hour. Her mouth twisted. "I told you they have a taste for theater. They enjoy the tightrope. And you walked onto it," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "I did," she said evenly, and he followed the person holding the rope. She nodded toward Ethan without looking at him. They wanted me to run in one direction, so he would run in the other. Men with keyboards and knives waited on both ends. Instead, he split the road. Ethan's voice was calm when he finally spoke. "They will not use that route again," he said. They dislike learning, but they are not entirely stupid. A handful of them will limp for a while. The rest will report the cost and be told to wait for a cheaper opportunity. I stared at him. You always speak like this, I said, and heard the old anger in my tone. Like the world is a ledger, like pain is arithmetic. For men like them, it is, he said. For the people we protect, it cannot be, which is why the people we protect do not look at the ledger until it is closed. He did not apologize. He did not claim heroics. He had returned with my sister because he had decided to, and because deciding is the only luxury men like him allow themselves. Tessa drew the blanket tighter. I brought what I promised, she said, addressing both of us and avoiding our eyes. She reached into the inner pocket of her jacket and pulled out a flat black drive, no larger than a matchbox. The last file, Ryan's Ghost. It is encrypted. I do not know how to open it. I do know that as long as it exists under my name or yours, they will keep circling. Ethan held out his hand. She hesitated the briefest moment, then set it in his palm. He weighed it the way you weigh a stone before you throw it into deep water to see how far it will sink. I will handle it, he said, quietly, permanently. Do you ever do anything loudly? Tessa asked, the old mischief flickering in her eyes. When necessary, he said, and the bruise at his eye answered for him. Silence settled again, kinder this time. I watched my sister look around the room, taking in the plants, the bright water through glass, the house beyond. She was a woman who measured spaces for escape routes and how easily laughter might echo there. She nodded to herself as if grudgingly admitting that this place had been built by someone who understood both. Do you want to see her? I asked, feeling my voice soften. She is sleeping, but she will know. Tessa's eyes shone more than anything. We walked back through the corridor together, Ethan a pace behind us, the house accepting our small procession without comment. In the doorway to Lila's suite, Tessa stopped and pressed her hand to the frame as if it were a charm. The nurse glanced up, ready to protect her patient with polite ferocity, then saw my face and let her shoulders settle. We went in. The room glowed with the even light that does not tire the eyes. Lila breathed, turned her face toward the sound of our steps, and did not wake. Tessa approached the bed with the reverence of someone arriving at an altar she did not know she believed in. Oh, little light, she whispered, so softly the machines did not bother to answer. You stubborn, brilliant thing. She did not touch Lila. She knelt instead and took the stuffed rabbit's frayed ear gently between her fingers, as if asking its permission to be part of this story. Her face folded. A single tear slid and was gone. She straightened, breathed, composed herself in the way we were both taught by a mother who believed in standing up straight even when bent inside. Behind us, Ethan remained at the threshold, the boundary he had kept all along. Lila stirred again, blinked, and opened her eyes with the seriousness of a child waking to check if the world kept its promises. Hi, Moon, she murmured to the rabbit, then saw Tessa. You are new. Tessa laughed, the sound small and bright. I am your aunt, she said. I have been practicing. Aunt, Lila repeated, testing the word. Do you like dragons? I am terrified of them, Tessa said gravely. So I will need your help. That is good, Lila said. I am brave. You are, Tessa answered, and the pride in her voice warmed the room. Lila's gaze drifted to the door where Ethan stood, tall and careful, hands in his pockets to keep from reaching. The careful man came back, she said. I said I would, he replied. Do you keep promises? She asked, weighing him. Yes, he said. Even the hard ones, she insisted. Especially those, he said. She accepted this with a nod. Because children are generous with belief until you teach them not to be. Her eyes fell shut again, surrendering to the slow tide of healing. We stood in the hush that follows a good answer. I felt something in me unclench, not entirely trust, not yet forgiveness, but the first loosening of a knot tied in a different life. The house seemed to notice. A door somewhere opened and closed with a civilized click. The scent of bread drifted from a distant kitchen. A maid hummed in a language I could not place. It was not luxury that undid me. It was the ordinariness the house allowed itself, despite the war it had been built to withstand. Later, when the nurse had shooed us out to let Lila sleep without an audience, Ethan led us down a short passage I had not noticed before. It opened into a long, bright room with high shelves and tall windows and a wooden counter worn by hands. For a second, I could not breathe. The room was a bookstore, my bookstore, transposed here like a spell. The same narrow aisles, the same ladder on rails, even the same battered table in the middle where I had laid out paperbacks to tempt the shy. My hand went to my mouth. What have you done? Built a choice, he said simply. Not a cage. He moved to the back wall and slid open a section of shelving I would have sworn was fixed. Beyond it, a small office. A bell above the interior door that would chime when someone came in from the hall. Space for inventory, space for quiet, space for me. When? I asked, the word barely leaving my throat. Months ago, he said. Before a phone call taught me what for. I walked the aisle, touching spines that were blank for now, my fingers remembering the muscle memory of placing stories where they belonged. The light fell cleanly across the floorboards. Dust would be allowed here, the soft kind that books make when you breathe around them. I turned and found him watching me, the way a man watches the sea for a sign the storm has turned. You cannot buy absolution, I said at last, because some truths need speaking even when kindness knocks. I do not want absolution, he said. I want you to know that if you stay, it will be because you want to. And if you go, this will be here if you need it. He looked at Tessa then. For both of you. Said. Tessa stood at the threshold with her arms folded and her chin lifted, eyes roaming the shelves as if mapping a future she might allow. You built a refuge with a cash register, she said. You are dangerous. Only to people who mistake power for force, he said. We left the false bookstore to its clean, expectant light and returned to the hall. The lake had shifted to late afternoon silver. The sky promised weather tomorrow. You learn to read such things when your life has depended on whether the road will be clear. In the doorway of Lila's room, Tessa caught my hand. I am not asking for forgiveness, she said. I am asking for work. Let me do some. Let me stay and earn the right to be in the same house when she laughs again. Something in me had already decided, and the rest of me was only now catching up. Stay, I said, but do not lie to me again. Not about danger, not about love, not about him. They. I will not, she said, and for once it felt like a promise she intended to keep, even if it cost her. Ethan had the grace to look away from our small treaty and study a painting as if it were more complicated than it was. When I looked at him, he met my eyes without moving closer. We were two people standing in a house by a lake, holding a past between us like a fragile glass, and wondering whether to drink or set it down. Thank you, I said, and even with all that remained unresolved, I meant it. For the rescue, for the room full of books, for the way he had not forced the next step. You are welcome, he said, and meant that too. Night thickened at the edges of the windows. Lamps came on, warm and domestic. Somewhere a door closed with the careful hush of a house that knows a child sleeps. The danger had not vanished. It rarely does. But it had been pushed back from the threshold, and sometimes that is the definition of peace. In the bed behind us, Lila turned and sighed and slept on, her body busy with its private miracle. I stood there between the two people who had changed the map of my life and listened to the house learn our names. And for the first time since I had pressed a hand against the cool glass of a different window in a different city, I felt something I could not mistake for anything else. It was not safety. It was not certainty. It was the simple, stubborn feeling of belonging, the kind that grows at the edges of love after you have stopped pretending you do not want it. Morning came softly to Blake Manor, spilling across the lake in ribbons of pale gold. Mist clung to the surface like a secret reluctant to leave. The first thing I saw when I woke was Lila's chest rising and falling in an easy rhythm, the monitors quiet, the color in her cheeks deepening with each hour of healing. The nurse smiled at me from her post near the window. Counts are climbing again, she said. Her marrow is waking up. The words unknotted, something deep in my spine. For 5 years, my life had been a small circle of waiting rooms and lab results, measuring hope in tiny increments. Now, for the first time, the horizon stretched farther than a week. Tessa had already been up for hours, the way people who have lived too long on adrenaline never sleep past dawn. She perched on a chair in the corner with a laptop balanced on her knees, muttering about encryption and ghosts. She had been feeding Ethan's team everything she knew about Delgado, sorting the remnants of Ryan's digital mess. We had spoken little about the past since she arrived. There was a kind of truce between us, forged by exhaustion and the smell of antiseptic. Ethan had not been in the suite since just before sunrise. I had glimpsed him through the glass as he moved down the corridor, speaking into a phone, his expression unreadable. Nick shadowed him, the two of them conferring in low tones, like men planning a chess game that included the weather and the lives of strangers. When he returned mid-morning, he carried no devices, no papers, only himself. He paused at the threshold, his eyes moving first to Lila, then to me. "How is she?" he asked softly. "Stronger," I said. "Sleeping." "Good." He hesitated, then, "Come with me. There's something I'd like to show you." I glanced at Tessa. She waved me off with a small smile. "Go," she said. "I'll sit dragon watch." I followed him out into the corridor. We walked in silence, past portraits of ships and landscapes, past the hidden eyes of security cameras, until he opened a door I hadn't noticed before. Sunlight poured through tall windows onto polished wood floors. For a second, my mind didn't understand what I was seeing. Then it did, and my breath caught. It was a bookstore. Not just a room with shelves, but my bookstore, Lily's Books, transposed here like a dream made solid. The same narrow aisles and rolling ladder. The same counter worn by my elbows. Even the little reading nook with its sagging armchair, now reupholstered in a soft gray that matched the house, the air smelled of paper and varnish, as if the room had been waiting to be filled. I turned slowly, my fingers brushing the empty spines of shelves that had yet to receive their books. I had it built months ago," Ethan said quietly. "Before I knew about her. Before I knew about you. Truly." I thought. He stopped, then began again. "I thought if you ever came back, you should have something that was yours, not a cage, a choice." I stared at him, the room spinning gently around us. "You did this for me?" "For you and for her," he said. "For mornings when she can walk through these aisles and pick a story. For afternoons when you need work that isn't survival. For nights when you want a door that closes on the world and opens on something better." The sunlight caught in his hair. He looked older than the man I had left, and younger in the same breath. "I know I can't erase what happened," he said. "I know I can't ask you to forgive me, but I can give you this. A space. Freedom. Something you built once that I kept safe without owning." I walked down the central aisle, my hand trailing along the edge of the shelves. Dust motes floated in the light. I remembered unlocking my shop each morning, turning the sign to open, the smell of paper and coffee. I remembered Lila, curled up in the corner with a picture book, her legs swinging, her eyes bright. I remembered the quiet dignity of small work, of stacking stories to make a life. When I turned back to him, he was watching me with that stillness I had come to recognize as both armor and plea. "You can't buy forgiveness with wood and shelves," I said. "I know," he said. "I'm not trying to buy anything. I'm trying to offer you a beginning you can choose. A as-Liz." Something in me softened and resisted at once. For years, every kindness had been a hook. Every gift had been a leash. But here was a room built not to keep, but to release. A room I had imagined in exile without knowing someone else was imagining it too. "Does she know?" I asked. "Not yet," he said. "I wanted you to see it first." We stood there in the sunlight, surrounded by empty shelves waiting for stories. In the quiet, I heard the faint echo of my daughter's laughter, as if the room had already learned her voice. "I don't know what happens after this," I said. "I don't know how to build a life out of two different worlds." "You don't have to know today," he said. "Today, you just have to stand in a room that's yours and decide if you want to fill it." I looked at him, the man who had once been a threat and was now something harder to name. His eyes were dark, but there was no ownership in them, only a question. "I'll need books," I said at last, my voice trembling. "Lots of them." A small smile ghosted across his mouth. "That can be arranged." When we returned to Lila's room, she was awake, propped against her pillows, coloring a dragon with a green crayon. Tessa sat beside her, reading the instructions for the next dose of medication aloud as if it were a fairy tale. Lila looked up when she saw us. "Where did you go?" she asked. "Your daddy showed me something," I said. "Was it a secret?" she asked, eyes wide. "A good one," I said. "You'll see it soon." She considered this, then held up her drawing. "This dragon is for him," she said, "because he's careful." Ethan took the paper from her with hands that were used to contracts and ledgers, but careful now as if holding a relic. "Thank you," he said. "I'll keep it safe." He met my eyes over her head. The unspoken words were there between us. I will keep her safe too. Later, when Lila slept again, I returned to the bookstore alone. I walked its aisles, imagining shelves lined with stories, my daughter curled in the corner with a book, my sister at the counter joking about change. I imagined Ethan at the door, not as a guard, but as a man who had built a house and left its doors unlocked. For the first time since I had run, I let myself believe in a future. Not a perfect one, not a safe one, but a future. The lake caught the last light of day, turning it to silver. Inside the empty bookstore, dust danced in the sun like confetti from some small secret celebration. And standing there, surrounded by waiting shelves, I realized what this room really was. It wasn't a gift. It was an invitation. The day Lila laughed without coughing, the lake answered with a small wind that lifted the water into a field of silver scales. The house heard it first, the way old houses do, and for a moment everything held still as if a conductor had raised a hand. Then the ordinary sounds resumed, footsteps muffled by rugs, a kettle sighing in the kitchen, the low conversation of people who had learned how to speak around recovery. I stood at the window and watched the light move along the water like a promise learning to walk. Lila slept in short, generous stretches now, her body busy with its quiet multiplication, her skin warm under my palm. Each morning, the nurse would announce numbers, plain, unpoetic things that nevertheless felt like poetry when they climbed. We had learned to live between decimals. We had learned to celebrate by degrees. Today, the numbers were good enough that Dr. Harper allowed us an hour in the garden, provided we dressed her as if the air were threaded with glass. We did. Hat, mask, tiny gloves, a blanket across her knees even in the mild sun, a procession of caution for a child who already believed she could ride a dragon bareback because she had once done something harder. Tessa helped settle her into the wheelchair with a reverence that made me forgive her for an entire minute at a time. She had moved into a room 2 doors down, the blanket from the conservatory folded at the foot of her bed, a talisman against choices made in haste. I no longer counted the lies. They had been weighed and named, and we all carried what remained. She told Lila stories about a mysterious aunt who could pick locks and make pancakes and had once outrun a thunderstorm on foot. Lila listened with half-lidded eyes and then asked if this aunt was now brave enough to be afraid. Tessa laughed, then answered yes, and that was when I knew we had begun again. We took the garden path that curled like a question around the lake. Ethan was already there, because he had the habit of arriving at the places we would need him 5 minutes before we did. He wore the same charcoal sweater, sleeves pushed to his forearms, a concession to the winter that the pines were considering. He stood beside the new bookstore's glass doors, which opened onto the path as if to insist that stories belong to the weather too. "Good morning," he said softly. And the greeting met us like the kind of politeness that protects rather than pretends. Lila lifted a gloved hand. "We are going to see the books." "You are going to approve the shelves," he corrected gravely. "I am only the carpenter." "I am the manager," she informed him. "Mommy hires me for stickers and recommendations." "Then I will submit to your authority," he said, and bowed with a seriousness that made her eyes bright. Inside, the store had changed while I slept. Boxes lined the counter, crisp brown punctuated by the black of titles, hand-lettered on masking tape. Someone had filled the lower shelves with picture books and early readers. The higher shelves waited for the weight of grown-up stories. A ladder leaned into its rails like a well-trained animal. On the back counter, 2 ceramic cups sat upside down on saucers, an invitation presuming acceptance. The room smelled like cardboard and ink and sunlight. Lila inhaled through her mask and made a sound that might have been a gasp if it had not been wrapped in the caution of breath. They are here. Some of them, I said, we will need more. I told him, Tessa said from behind us, that he underestimated your capacity for paper. She set a box on the counter and pried it open with her thumbnail. He pretended not to understand what I meant. It is how men like him flirt. Ethan did not rise to the bait. He watched me instead, one hand on the back of Lila's chair, careful not to touch, the other in his pocket, as if to keep it from betraying him. The bruise beneath his eye had faded to the color of a memory. He moved more easily now that the soreness of the harvest had loosened its hold, but something in his posture remained altered, as if a hinge had been adjusted to accommodate new weight responsibility rather than threat. We unpacked in the hour, Doctor. Harper had given us, the 3 of us moving without instruction, a choreography the body remembers, even when the mind resists. Tessa ferried stacks to the table with a smug efficiency that made me roll my eyes because it softened the throat tightness I could not admit to. Ethan opened boxes with the carefulness of a man disarming an old bomb. Lila approved or vetoed covers with the blunt honesty of 5-year-olds who have no interest in the metaphors adults nurse like small, expensive pets. When I placed the first book on the first shelf, the bell above the interior door chimed. Instinct made my heart stutter. Habit made my body turn toward the sound. It was only Nick, holding up his hands like a man approaching a nervous animal. Testing, he said, for when customers arrive who are neither armed nor fictional. You are not funny, I told him, finding a smile anyway. He glanced at Lila. Good morning, boss. She regarded him solemnly. Do you like dragons? Very much, he said. I carry one on my shoulder where no one can see it, in case. He tapped the precise line where tendon meets collarbone and kept the lie for her in the place where such gifts are stored. When the hour ended, we slipped the mask from Lila's face only long enough for her to sip water, then wheeled her back along the path with the slow ceremony of people who do not intend to anger any gods on duty. The nurse met us at the suite door with a frown she smoothed into a nod when she saw Lila's color and the measured ease of her breathing. Inside, the machines resumed their careful gossip. I tucked the dragon blanket around her and kissed the soft spot above her eyebrow where the future presses its thumb. She fell asleep holding a small paper receipt I had folded into a crown. The afternoon stretched gentle and obedient. I learned the language of the house's domestic hours, the click of knitting needles from the housekeeper's alcove, the smell of cinnamon warming through the vents as if a ghost had found the kitchen, the low exchange of information between security and staff that never raised a voice. I spoke to Dr. Harper about timelines and graft versus host disease and the specific ways we would thwart fate. She listened the way she did everything, completely. When she left, she wrote her number again on a note card and tucked it into the frame of a photograph of the lake, as if the glass could call for help on its own. There were still messages from the world beyond the pines. Nick intercepted a rumor that a man with a limp and a mean laugh had been seen asking careful questions in Dorchester. A package arrived at a warehouse in Pilsen that no one opened and no one signed for. It went back the way it came, and then nowhere at all. The file Tessa had brought sat on a table in a room without windows until Ethan's people pried it open like a jaw and extracted the poison it carried. I did not ask for details. He did not offer them. Perhaps that is a betrayal of honesty. Perhaps it is an economy of love. Either way, the pressure at the edge of the story eased, and for a while the danger contented itself with memory. Near sunset, the house changed key. Lamps lit the corridors. The kitchen produced a soup that tasted like patience. The lake turned copper, then pewter, then the deep blue that swallows edges. Lila woke hungry and ate half a bowl and declared the broth acceptable, which is how royalty learns to forgive ordinary food. She asked if the bookstore would have a stool behind the counter just for her. I told her yes. Ethan asked, very seriously, whether this stool would require a background check. She considered and then pronounced him allowed to sit upon it if he washed his hands and promised not to make change without supervision. After she slept again, the nurse shooed us into the hall with a practiced kindness. Tessa went to call a friend she swore was not involved in anything that would make me lose sleep. I did not argue because I have learned to choose my wars. I walked the length of the gallery alone, the paintings along the wall like windows into lives that never had to dodge men with cameras or names with syndicate after them. At the far end, the doors to the terrace stood open, letting in evening air that smelled faintly of water and wood smoke. Ethan sat on the low stone bench beside the curve of the window, elbows on his knees, the posture of a man who is not pretending to be unbreakable. I joined him without asking. The sky was the color of a bruise learning to heal. The water accepted it without complaint. She laughed today, I said. In the store. I heard, he said. It carried. We sat in the slow comfort that comes when the next need is not already barking at the door. He did not touch me. I did not lean against him. It felt like standing on opposite banks of a river and discovering that without moving, you are closer than yesterday. She asked earlier, I said eyes on the water if you were staying. And what did you say? That you would stay as long as she wanted you to. I was quiet for a beat. She will want you to. He did not speak for a moment. When he did, his voice was quieter than the air. And you? I do not make decisions well when they arrive wearing forever, I said, but I am learning to make them for tomorrow. He turned his head just enough that I could feel the attention as a temperature. Tomorrow then. Tomorrow, I agreed. A loon called across the lake, a sound like a flute played underwater. Somewhere a door closed softly. The house settled into its nighttime bones. I thought of the bookstore, of the shelves waiting like open hands, of the bell that would ring and startle me into laughter the first time a stranger came inside for a story. I thought of Lila's crown of receipt paper, and the way she had held it like proof that even small things can be royal. I thought of Tessa asleep 2 doors down, her laptop closed on a silence she had finally chosen. You cannot protect us from everything, I said, not as accusation, but as a kindness he might not give himself. No, he said, but I can try without taking away the thing I am trying to save. I looked at him then. Really looked. His face was that paradox I had come to recognize, the discipline of a man who had taught himself not to want, and the ache of someone who had discovered he did. He had given blood, he had built rooms, he had drawn lines and refused to cross them even when it would have been easier to carry me over. I had left him once because fear wore reason's mask. I did not intend to leave again for that same old masquerade. Lila stirred behind the glass, shifting into the warm center of her bed. We both turned toward the movement, the same instinct pulling our eyes like gravity. When we faced each other again, something had moved in the space between us, a subtle click, a hinge admitting it had been meant to open all along. I am not promising you a simple life, I said. I would not believe you if you did, he answered. I am promising you mine, complicated, careful, brutally honest when I remember how. And patient, I said. And patient, he echoed. We stood. The evening had cooled. Breath showed briefly as speech. At the door, I paused and looked back at the water, the trees, the outline of the house against the sky. It had the look of a beginning wearing the clothes of a refuge. I have learned to trust such disguises. They are the ones that last. Inside, Lila dreamed, the monitor marking time with the indifference of clocks. Tessa's door was ajar, surrender rather than invitation. Somewhere in the depths of the manor, servers hummed, files dissolved, a threat misfiled itself into the past. In the glass-walled room at the curve of the path, a bookstore waited with its bell quiet and its shelves ready. Tomorrow, I would hang the sign with my hands, sweep the threshold, stack the paperbacks in an untidy temple, teach my daughter the till, and ask my sister to write the window in chalk. Tonight, I walked back into the room where my child breathed and sat in the chair I had come to know better than any place in the world. Ethan took the other chair, not across from me, but near, angled toward the door like a promise he had made with his body. We did not speak. We watched our daughter sleep. We kept the world, for an hour, outside. It is the smallest definition of love I know. Not fixing, not claiming, not even understanding. Just staying, just beginning. The lake turned its face to the moon. The house closed its eyes. And somewhere between the last page of what had almost broken us and the first page of what might yet save us, we started to write line by quiet line the book we had been trying for years to find.